Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. We're going to travel back in time, not just as observers, but as the main character. You? And tonight, you've just hit the absolute jackpot. You are the new emperor of Rome, the most powerful person in the known world. It sounds great, doesn't it though? If we're being honest, given the track record, you probably won't make it to the end of this series alive. Just a little heads up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And for a bit of fun, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air itself feels different up here. Thinner, maybe. Or maybe it's just you. You're standing on the balcony of your new home, the sprawling palace complex on the Palatine hill. Below you, the city of Rome unfolds like a map of your own power, a sea of flickering oil lamps and terracotta roofs stretching to the horizon. You can smell the scent of jasmine from the palace gardens mingling with the faint, distant smells of wood smoke and baking bread from the city below. It's intoxicating. Just yesterday, or last week, or a month ago, time has become a blur. You were a general on some dusty frontier, or a senator navigating the treacherous currents of Roman politics. You had rivals, yes, but you also had peers. You had friends you could speak to as equals. Now you have no peers. None? Every single person you see, from the Praetorian Guard standing silently behind you to the wealthiest aristocrat in the city, is your inferior. You turn and walk back inside, your leather sandals making almost no sound on the impossibly smooth marble floors. The silence in here is a different kind of silence than you're used to. It's a heavy, watchful silence. The corridors are vast, lined with statues of your predecessors, their blank marble eyes seeming to follow you. Some of them were deified, worshipped as gods. Others were assassinated, their names officially erased from history in a process called Dam Dio Memoria. You make a mental note to check which is which. It feels important. This place, the Palatine, wasn't always the heart of imperial power. It used to be just a very posh neighborhood for Rome's old money families. That's a key piece of history right there. It was Augustus, the first of your kind, who cleverly established his home here. He was meticulous, always maintaining the facade of being the princeps, the first citizen, rather than an overt king. He bought his house, expanded it, connected it to a temple of Apollo, and slowly, subtly, turned this entire hill into the common center of the empire. He created the very stage on which you now stand. As you wander through the labyrinthine halls, you begin to notice the sheer scale of the operation that exists solely to support you. You don't just have servants, you have a universe of them. There are slaves for every conceivable task. You have a no-men-see-elad or a slave whose only job is to whisper the names of important people in your ear at parties, so you don't have to remember them yourself. You have a taster whose job is to eat your food first, a grim but necessary precaution. And here's a little detail they don't always mention in the history books. You likely have specialized slaves for the most mundane things. A slave whose entire existence is dedicated to ensuring your wine is mixed with perfectly chilled water. Another whose sole purpose is to hold your mirror at the correct angle while you shave. This isn't luxury, it's a complete detachment from the basic mechanics of living. You pass the doorway and glance inside a small, ornate room. A man in his simple tunic is meticulously polishing a collection of silver goblets. He doesn't look up, but you can feel his awareness of you, a prickle on your skin. He is part of the machinery. Everyone is. The guards, the cooks, the scribes, the bath attendants, the women who arrange the flowers in the hallways. They are all cogs in the great machine of you. Their lives are dedicated to your comfort, your safety, your whims. And with that thought, a sliver of unease finds its way through the euphoria. You are the most powerful man alive, but you are also the most watched. you are never, ever truly alone. The very architecture of your new home reflects this. The palace is a maze of public reception halls, semi-private audience chambers, and finally, deep within, the private apartments. But how private are they? Really, historians and archaeologists, by the way, are still arguing over the exact floor plan of the imperial palace during different reigns. They unearth a new wall or a mosaic floor, and for the next decade, they'll debate whether it was part of a grand dining room where you entertain the Senate or a secret passageway leading to a private bath suite. The lines between public and private were intentionally blurred because your life is no longer your own. Your body, your health, your moods, they are all matters of state. As the night deepens, you finally find your way to your bedchamber. It's larger than the entire house you grew up in. The bed itself is a monstrous creation of carved wood and fine linens. A single slave stands motionless in the corner, waiting for any command you might give. You dismiss him with a wave of your hand, wanting, for just a moment, to feel a sense of solitude. But the silence that follows is not peaceful. It's filled with the ghosts of what this room represents. This is where the fate of the empire will be decided. It is where you will be expected to produce an heir, where you will sleep beside a wife who is likely a political chess piece, and where, if things go wrong, an assassin's dagger is most likely to find you. This is your home now. This gilded cage. And as you lie down, staring up at a ceiling painted with myths and legends, a quiet, unnerving thought slithers into your mind from this high up. The only way to go is down. The morning light that filters into your bedchamber doesn't bring clarity. It brings a new, more profound sense of disorientation. In your old life, morning meant routine, responsibilities, a schedule dictated by others or by necessity. Now, morning means nothing until you decide it does. You lie there, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams, and you realize you could stay in this bed all day, or all week. You could command a 10-course breakfast to be served right here, or you could have the bed moved to the gardens to sleep under the open sky. No one would question it. No one could question it. Eventually, you rise. Immediately, servants materialize from the shadows. One drapes a warm, soft linen tunic over your shoulders. Another kneels to place soft leather sandals on your feet. You don't have to reach for anything. You don't have to think. You are simply moved through the motions of starting a day like a revered statue being prepared for a festival. It's efficient, it's luxurious, and it's deeply, deeply unnerving. The true vertigo, however, begins when you start your day's business. An aide approaches, his head bowed, holding a stack of scrolls. These are legal cases, disputes from across the empire that have been appealed all the way to you. You are the final judge. You unroll the first scroll. It's a tedious property dispute between two merchants in Ephesus. You read the details, the arguments, the precedents. And then it hits you. A thought so profound it almost makes you laugh out loud. The laws detailed on this scroll, the complex web of rules that have governed Rome for centuries, they don't apply to you. This isn't just a feeling, it's a legal reality. This is our first major historical point for the night, the concept of legibus solitas, which literally means released from the laws. The Senate had granted this power to your predecessor, Augustus, and it was passed down to you. It means you are not bound by the statutes that govern every other citizen. You can't be prosecuted. You can't be sued. You are, in effect, a living, breathing legal exception. Think about what that does to a person's mind. For your entire life, your behavior has been shaped by rules, both written and unwritten. Don't steal. Don't injure. Don't break contracts. These rules are the guardrails of society. Suddenly, you find yourself on a road with no guardrails, no speed limit, and no stop signs. You could walk out into the forum, see a beautiful horse belonging to a senator, and simply say, "That's my horse now." The senator would likely thank you for the honor of noticing his horse. Let's try a small experiment. Later in the day, you're walking through the palace and you notice that one of your advisors is wearing a particularly beautiful signet ring, a flash of sapphire and gold. You stop and compliment it. He immediately fumbles to take it off, pressing it into your palm with a nervous smile. A gift. Caesar, he stammers. A trifle. It's not a gift. It's a terrified offering. You didn't even have to ask. You just had to want to ask. This is the moment the sickness begins. This absolute freedom. It's a slow-acting poison. At first, you might try to be just, to be fair, to remember the man you were before you wore the purple toga. But the temptation is constant, and it comes in 1,000 tiny forms. Here's a small, weird detail for you. You sit down for your midday meal. You're not particularly hungry, but the food appears. And it's not normal food. The chef, trying to impress you, has prepared a dish of flamingo brains and parrot tongues, seasoned with exotic spices from the furthest reaches of the Silk Road. Why not because it tastes particularly good though? Who knows? Maybe it does, but because it's absurdly expensive and difficult to procure. Eating it is a performance. It's a way of demonstrating that you can consume things no one else can even dream of. It's another way of saying the rules of nature, of economics, of scarcity, they bend for me. The real danger is that this power isolates you. How can you have a real conversation with anyone when they are terrified of disagreeing with you? How can you trust a compliment when it's offered by someone whose career depends on your good mood? Your friends from your old life are now your clients, petitioners, and potential rivals. The easy camaraderie you once knew is gone, replaced by a stilted, formal deference. And this leads to a question that historians have been arguing about for centuries. When we look at emperors who became infamous for their cruelty and dexus, like Caligula or Nero, were they always psychologically unstable individuals who were just given a platform for their madness, or were they relatively normal men who were driven mad by the soul-crushing, isolating, and corrupting nature of absolute, unchecked power? Did the position create the monster, or did it just unlock the cage? As you sit in a vast, silent room, picking at a meal you didn't ask for, surrounded by people who will not speak unless spoken to, you start to feel the answer. The power isn't a tool you wield. It's an environment you inhabit, an atmosphere you breathe. And you can feel it changing you, chipping away at the person you used to be. The freedom is intoxicating, yes, but it's the freedom of falling. There's nothing to hold on to, and you begin to suspect that you won't even realize how far you've fallen until you finally hit the bottom. The sun sets, and with the darkness comes a different kind of performance. Today, you were the supreme judge, the commander-in-chief, the final authority on all matters of state. Tonight, you are expected to be something else entirely, the host. You are throwing a banquet, and the guest list is a who's who of Roman high society. Senators, wealthy equestrians, high-ranking military officers, they are all coming to your home to eat your food and drink your wine. As you prepare, you're not just putting on clean clothes, you're putting on a costume. This is the core concept of what historians call the two bodies of a ruler. One is your physical body, the one that gets tired and hungry and feels the draft from a poorly sealed window. The other is your body politic, a symbolic embodiment of the state itself. Tonight, you must be the latter. Your every gesture, every word, every choice of dish served at the banquet will be scrutinized and interpreted for political meaning. Your servants dress you in a toga of the finest wool, bleached to a brilliant white, with a broad purple stripe, the latus clavus that marks your senatorial rank. But everyone knows it signifies so much more now. It feels heavy, theatrical. You look at your reflection in a polished bronze mirror. The face staring back is yours, but it also isn't. It's the face on the coins that a merchant is using to buy grain in Egypt right now. It's a symbol. You walk into the dining hall. The famous triclinium guests are already reclining on couches arranged in a U-shape, the traditional Roman dining setup. They fall silent as you enter, a wave of quiet deference washing over the room. You take your place at the head couch, the position of honor. The performance has begun. The food is, of course, extravagant. Oysters are served on beds of snow carried down from the mountains. There are roasted peacocks, their feathers reattached after cooking to create a bizarrely lifelike centerpiece. Wine, heavily sweetened with honey and spiced with herbs, flows freely. But this isn't just a meal. It's a political tool. The seating arrangement is a delicate map of favor and influence. The men seated closest to you are the ones currently in your good graces. The ones relegated to the lowest couch, furthest from you, are being sent a subtle message of displeasure. You might offer a particularly choice piece of meat to one senator, a public sign of his rising stock. You might ignore another's attempt to engage you in conversation, a public humiliation that will be gossiped about for weeks. In your private life, you might be a simple man who enjoys playing food and quiet company. But here, you can't be. You must project an aura of effortless superiority. You laugh at a joke that isn't particularly funny, and the whole room erupts in forced laughter with you. You make a bland observation about the weather, and the senator next to you praises it as a profound insight. The disconnect between your inner self and this public persona is dizzying. You are acting a part, and so is everyone else in the room. It's a play where everyone knows their lines, and the plot is always the emperor is great. Here's a curious little detail about these events. Roman high society banquets had a specific, if sometimes gross, etiquette. If a guest overindulged, it was not uncommon for them to go to a designated room called a vomit or IUM to be sick, so they could return to the feast and continue eating. Now, this is a bit of a pop history myth. The word vomit, while actually referred to the large passageways in an amphitheater, or theater that allowed crowds to spew forth or exit quickly. But the practice of purging during feasts to extend the pleasure is described by writers like Seneca. While it probably wasn't as common as movies make it seem, the fact that it was discussed at all speaks to a culture of extreme indulgence among the elite. For you, the emperor, providing enough food and wine to necessitate such behavior is a sign of your boundless generosity and wealth. The real tension lies in the moments when the private man peeks through the public mask. Maybe you drink a little too much wine. Your speech becomes slightly slurred. Your jokes a bit too crude. Your guests will still laugh, but now there's a nervous edge to it. They are watching you, gauging your mood, trying to figure out if the benevolent god king is about to be replaced by a petty, unpredictable tyrant. This is the tightrope you walk. Historians are perpetually fascinated by this duality. They debate how much an emperor's personal feelings, his insecurities, his grudges, his genuine affections influenced his public policy. Did Emperor Claudius, for instance, invade Britain partly because he, a man with physical disabilities who had been mocked his whole life, needed a grand military triumph to secure his authority? Did Hadrian's deep love for Greek culture, a very personal passion, shape his administrative and architectural policies across the empire? The line between the man and the monument is almost impossible to draw. As the night wears on, the faces of your guests begin to blur. The music, the endless food, the cloying scent of incense and expensive perfumes, it all merges into a dull roar. You are the center of it all, but you feel completely detached. You are playing the part of the emperor, and the role is slowly consuming the man who plays it. You smile, you nod, you dispense pleasantries, but your real self has retreated to a quiet, lonely place deep inside. You are surrounded by people, yet you have never felt more alone. The public spectacle of power is, you realize, just another form of isolation. The banquet eventually winds down. The last of the wine-flushed senators have offered their final, flowery goodbyes. The servants are silently clearing away the wreckage of the feast. You navigate the now quiet corridors back toward your private apartments, and the public performance of the evening gives way to a private one of a very different sort. It's time to go to your wife's chambers, your empress. And let's be very clear about this, your marriage is not a romance. It is the most important business merger of your life. The woman waiting for you in that room is not your sweetheart or your confidant. She is your partner in the ruthless enterprise of dynastic survival. You push open the heavy wooden doors. She is there, perhaps reading a scroll or being attended to by her own ladies-in-waiting, who melt away at your arrival. The room is opulent, a mirror of your own quarters, but it is distinctly her territory. You two might have separate, adjoining apartments, a common practice for the super-wealthy, allowing for a degree of personal space. But tonight, that space must be bridged. Your wife was chosen for you, or by you, with cold calculation. Was her family old and respected, lending your new regime a veneer of legitimacy? Did her father command a critical legion on the frontier, making this marriage a way to ensure his loyalty? Was she the daughter of your predecessor, a living link to the previous dynasty? Her value is measured in bloodlines, alliances, and political capital. Love is a luxury neither of you can afford. This is a fundamental aspect of Roman elite society, amplified to the extreme at the imperial level. Marriage was a tool for forging alliances and transferring property. Affection might grow over time, as it sometimes does in arranged pairings, but it was never the prerequisite. Your primary duty to each other is brutally simple. You must produce a male heir, a son. Without one, all your power, all this grandeur, rest on a knife's edge, very likely a civil war. So, the imperial bedchamber is not a place of intimacy, it's a political arena. As you sit down, the conversation is likely polite, formal, and freighted with unspoken meaning. She might tell you about a petition she received from a noblewoman. You might discuss a minor appointment. You are both feeling each other out, like two CEOs discussing quarterly reports. She is your closest advisor and your most dangerous potential rival. She has access to you at your most vulnerable when you are sleeping. She has her own network of clients, spies, and allies within the palace. A loyal empress can be your greatest asset, solidifying your rule and managing the complex social world of the court. A disloyal one, well, Roman history is littered with the corpses of emperors who misjudged their wives. Think of Livia, the wife of Augustus. She was the model Roman empress, dignified, publicly modest, fiercely loyal to her husband's interests. But ancient gossips, like the historian Tacitus, painted darker picture. They whisper that she was a master of palace intrigue, a cold and calculating political operator who may have cleared the path for her own son, Tiberius, to succeed Augustus by arranging the timely deaths of other potential heirs. Was she a devoted wife or a benign-looking spider at the center of a web? Historians still debate this furiously. Her story is a perfect example of the dual role your own wife must play. She is the guardian of your legacy and, potentially, its greatest threat. And here's a quirky, fascinating detail about Roman marriage customs. At the wedding ceremony, the bride's hair would be parted into 6 sections using a special bent spearhead. The hasta Caligula is the symbolism of this is debated. Some think it was a ritual to ward off evil spirits, others believe it was a symbolic act of capture, a remnant of Rome's earliest days when men supposedly abducted the Sabine women. It's a stark reminder that even the most intimate aspects of life are bound by rigid tradition and ancient superstition. Your own marriage would have been steeped in such rituals, every part of it a public declaration of a new political reality. So here you are, alone with this powerful, strategic woman. The air is thick with expectation. The silence is not comfortable. It's the silence of negotiation. You both know what is required. The act of procreation is stripped of romance and becomes a state duty, a dynastic necessity. It's another performance, perhaps the most important one of all. You are not two people connecting, you are 2 dynasties forging a future, a single point of failure upon which the stability of the entire Roman world depends. There's a chilling pressure in this room that is unlike any other. The fate of millions rests on what happens here in this bed. And as you look at your empress, you see not just a wife, but a reflection of your own predicament. She too is trapped in a gilded cage, a prisoner of her own power and position. And in that shared, unspoken understanding, you might find the only real intimacy this life allows. Weeks, maybe months, have passed since your ascension. The initial vertigo of absolute power is starting to subside, replaced by a kind of routine. You've settled into the rhythm of the palace. You meet with senators, you dictate letters to governors, you listen to petitioners, you sign off on grain shipments. You are, by all accounts, doing a decent job. You are trying to be the emperor you believe Rome needs, just firm and respectable. You are resisting the siren's song of excess. But the poison of absolute freedom, as we've discussed, is a slow-acting one. It doesn't always announce itself with grand acts of tyranny. It seeps in through the small cracks in your daily life. The fall from grace begins with tiny, almost unattainable compromises. It starts with boredom. The sheer, soul-crushing boredom of being the emperor. Every day is a variation of the day before. The same bowing courtiers, the same endless scrolls, the same calculated conversations. You crave something new, something stimulating, something that makes you feel anything at all. So, one afternoon, you decide to skip a tedious meeting with the city's sewer administrators. Who is going to stop you? You wander into the palace gardens instead. A servant sees you and, thinking you desire entertainment, rushes to bring a troupe of musicians. They play beautifully, but it's the same music you hear every day. You wave them away. He then offers to bring a philosopher to engage you in a stimulating debate. You decline. You're not in the mood for deep thoughts. Then, he makes another suggestion. He knows of a man in the city who trains birds to do remarkable tricks. Another who can juggle knives while balancing on a rolling ball. Another who owns a collection of exotic beasts from Ethiopia. Your interest is piqued. It's different. It's novel. You order them to be brought to the palace. The next day, you spend hours watching a canary pull a tiny chariot and a monkey dressed in a miniature soldier's uniform march back and forth. It's absurd, it's pointless, but it's a distraction. You reward the trainers with a bag of gold coins so large it makes them gasp. The word spreads like wildfire through the city. The emperor is a patron of novelties. He pays well for amusement. This is the first step, the pursuit of distraction. Soon, the bird trainer is replaced by something more elaborate. A famous gladiator is summoned to the palace, not to fight, but to give you a private demonstration of his skills. You watch, fascinated, as he moves with a lethal grace that you, in your cushioned life, can never possess. You find yourself becoming a fan, asking for him by name, showering him with gifts. Next, you develop a taste for something more specific. Perhaps it's chariot racing. You start spending more and more time at the Circus Maximus. At first, you're just an observer. Then, you start placing huge bets, your wagers setting the odds for the entire city. Then, one day, the idea enters your head, whispered by a sycophantic courtier looking to win your favor. Caesar, with your steady hand, you would be a master charioteer yourself. The idea is scandalous. An emperor, a semi-divine figure, participating in a public spectacle alongside common racers and slaves, it's beneath your dignity. But the thought is thrilling. To feel the spray of sand on your face, the thunder of hooves, the roar of the crowd, it's a taste of real life, something visceral and unscripted. So you do it, first in a private track within the palace grounds. Then, emboldened, you make your debut at the circus. The crowd roars. You win, of course you do. No one would dare try to beat you. But it doesn't matter. For a few frantic moments, you felt something real. This progression from respectable ruler to public performer is a classic storyline for the bad emperors. The historian Cassius Dio tells us that Emperor Commodus, for example, became obsessed with gladiatorial combat. He fought in the arena hundreds of times, but these were not fair fights. His opponents were either wounded soldiers or terrified amateurs who were ordered to submit. He would charge the state an exorbitant fee for each of his appearances, bankrupting the gladiatorial fund. He wasn't just an enthusiast, he was corrupting the very institution he claimed to love, turning it into a stage for his own ego. And here's a quirky little bit of trivia for you. Roman elites had a strange fascination with gladiators, a sort of celebrity worship. Some high-born women were known to have affairs with them, and gladiator sweat was considered a bizarrely potent cosmetic. It would be scraped off the athlete's skin with a tool called a S3X and sold in little pots as a beauty enhancement or aphrodisiac. So your own obsession, while undignified, would be tapping into a peculiar, pre-existing cultural vein. The problem, as you stand in the arena, your heart pounding, is that each new thrill requires a higher dose to achieve the same effect. Today it's chariot racing. What will it be tomorrow? The line between the emperor and the entertainer is blurring, and the slide into self-indulgence has a dark side. It starts with harmless curiosities, but it creates a psychological need for constant stimulation and a detachment from the consequences of your actions. Historians are still trying to unravel the precise timelines of this kind of decay. When exactly did Nero, who started his reign as a promising and well-advised young man, decide it was a good idea to perform his own poetry and songs on a public stage? Was it a single decision, or a slow erosion of his sense of propriety, egged on by a court full of flatterers? You don't see it as a moral failing. You see it as a cure for the suffocating boredom of your office. You tell yourself it makes you popular with the common people. But as you return to the palace, flushed with a hollow victory from the racetrack, you fail to notice the worried looks on the faces of your more serious advisors. You have started to prioritize your personal amusement over your imperial duties. The foundation of your authority is beginning to crack, and you are the one holding the hammer. Your pursuit of novelty and distraction is beginning to bleed into every aspect of your life, including the most private. The imperial bedchamber, once a sterile arena for dynastic duty, is now becoming another stage for your whims. You've come to realize something profound and dangerous. Your desires don't just bring you pleasure, they demonstrate your power. When you command something to happen, and it happens, no matter how strange or unconventional, it reaffirms your position at the top of the food chain. This is the moment we address the elephant in the room, the idea that for an emperor, intimacy is rarely about intimacy. It's about power. As the old saying, M is attributed to half the powerful men in history. Go's power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. But for a Roman emperor, it's more than that. Power isn't just the attractant, it's the main event. The act itself becomes an expression of your absolute dominion over another person. Let's ground this in your reality. You are in your palace. You can summon anyone. Anyone. The wife of a senator, the son of a governor, the celebrated dancer from Greece. They captured warrior from Germania. You don't ask. Their consent is irrelevant. Their purpose is to serve your will. This isn't a seduction, it's a requisition. You are not a partner in the act, you are the sole actor, and they are the property. This specific concept, the use of intimacy to assert dominance, is central to understanding the Roman elite mindset. For a Roman male citizen of high status, there was no concept of homosexuality in the modern sense. The moral and social judgment of a sexual act was not based on the gender of the partner. It was based on who was the active or dominant partner and who was the passive or penetrated one. As long as a high-status Roman man was the active partner, his choice of a woman man was the active partner. A young man or a slave was largely a matter of personal taste. It was being the passive partner that was seen as shameful and unmasculine, because it meant you were taking the role of a woman or a subordinate. So when you, as emperor, choose a partner, you are reenacting your social and political status on a physical level. You are the conqueror. You are Rome. They are the conquered province. Every interaction becomes a small-scale triumph, a ritual reaffirmation of your power. Let's imagine a scenario. A provincial governor has been particularly effective, and you wish to reward him. You invite him and his wife to a banquet, At the end of the meal, you might publicly praise the governor's work, and then, in the same breath, praise his wife's beauty and invite her to your chambers. This is not a slight against the husband. In the twisted logic of this world, it is the ultimate honor. The emperor has noticed his property and found it worthy. The husband is elevated by this attention. He is now a man whose wife has known the emperor. His status is enhanced. His wife's feelings on the matter are, of course, not part of the equation. This is a recurring theme in the accounts of historians like Suetonius and Tacitus. They describe Augustus as being notorious for this practice. Suetonius claims that the emperor would often have the wives of distinguished men brought to him, sometimes pulling them away from the dinner table right in front of their husbands. He would then return them a short while later, offering a frank and sometimes critical review of their performance, as if he were inspecting a new horse. Now we have to be careful with these stories. This is our academic debate moment. Many modern historians argue that writers like Suetonius were essentially political pamphleteers writing sensationalist biographies long after the emperors were dead. They may have exaggerated or even fabricated the most scandalous details to make a moral point, or simply to write a more exciting book. The idea of Augustus, the careful architect of the conservative August and Restoration, behaving like a crude tyrant in private, is something scholars still argue about. Was it a smear campaign, or was it the hidden reality behind the public mask of piety? Regardless of the literal truth of every story, the theme itself is what's important. These stories were told and retold because they were believable to a Roman audience. They rang true with their understanding of how absolute power worked. Let's bring in a strange but illustrative detail. The Romans had a fascinatedly explicit vocabulary for these things, much of which is, shall we say, not suitable for a family-friendly history lesson. But they also had a god, a minor deity named Mutu Nus Titu Nus, whose phallic shrine was consulted by Roman brides. It was part of the wedding ritual for the bride to, in some symbolic way, straddle the idol, supposedly to prepare her for intercourse and ensure fertility. It's a stark reminder of how intertwined religion, superstition, and the raw mechanics of sex were in their worldview. Your own actions as emperor, seen as semi-divine, would carry a similar, if much more intimidating weight. You are beginning to see everyone around you not as a person, but as a potential object for your use. The beautiful slave boy who serves you wine is not a human being with hopes and fears. He is a potential source of amusement. The stoic guard at your door is not a husband and father. He is a symbol of masculine strength you might wish to dominate. The world is flattening out, becoming a catalogue of your appetites. The humanity of others is fading, and in the process, so is your own. The corruption isn't just about breaking rules anymore. It's about forgetting that other people even exist as separate entities from your own will. The sun is setting over the Palatine hill, casting long, dramatic shadows across the marble floors of your palace. Tonight is another one of those carefully orchestrated banquets, but this one has a specific, unspoken purpose. You have invited Senator Varro and his wife, Dumidier, to dine with you. Varro is an old guard aristocrat, from a family that traces its lineage back to the founding of the Republic. He is respected, influential, and you suspect not entirely thrilled with your consolidation of power. He is a subtle threat, a man who commands deference in the Senate House just by his presence. Tonight, you're going to remind him who is truly in charge. The setting is intimate, just the three of you in a small, elegant dining room, away from the prying eyes of the larger court. The conversation is polite, even warm. You discuss politics, harvests, the latest news from the Germanic frontier. You praise Varro for a speech he recently gave. He accepts the compliment with practiced humility. His wife, Dumidier, is intelligent and poised, contributing to the conversation with a grace that shows she is no stranger to the halls of power. On the surface, it's a picture of civilized discourse. But beneath the surface, it's a duel. Your every gesture is a move on the chessboard. When the wine is poured, you serve Varro yourself, a gesture that could be seen as one of humility. But in this context, it's as I, the master of the world, can choose to perform the role of a servant for you because your status exists only at my whim. As the meal progresses, your attention shifts more and more pointedly toward his wife, du Midi. You compliment her wit. You praise her choice of jewelry. You direct your questions and anecdotes to her, leaving her husband in a state of polite, smiling silence. Varro understands the game. He cannot object. To show jealousy would be a sign of weakness, an admission that he sees you as a rival rather than his superior. He must sit there and watch as you, the emperor, hold court with his wife. This is the classic Roman power dynamic we touched on before, but now we're seeing it in action. The humiliation of a political rival was often achieved not by attacking him directly, but through the women of his household. His wife, his daughter, they were seen as extensions of his property and his honor. By asserting dominance over them, you assert dominance over him. The historian Suetonius provides the most infamous example of this with the Emperor Caligula. The story goes that Caligula would attend the wedding ceremonies of high-ranking noblemen. During the feast, he would abruptly decide he fancied the bride, have her carried off to his own chambers, and then return her to the wedding party later, disheveled and traumatized. Disheveled and traumatized, sometimes offering a public critique of her qualities. This act is so monstrous, so far beyond the pale, that it perfectly illustrates the point. It wasn't about demonstrating, in the most brutal way possible, that the social contracts and sacred bonds that held society together like marriage did not apply to him. He could shatter the most important moment in a man's life for a passing whim, and no one could do a thing about it. So, here you are, with Varro and du Midi. You wouldn't do anything as crude as Caligula, of course. You are more sophisticated. The threat is enough. After the meal, you might suggest a tour of your private art collection. As you lead the way, you might gently take du Midi's arm, guiding her, leaving her husband to follow a few paces behind. You show them a statue, but you speak only to her, your voice low, your proximity a little too close for comfort. You are violating social norms in a way that is undeniable but deniable. If challenged, you could simply claim you were being a gracious host. But everyone, especially Varro, knows exactly what is happening. You are marking your territory, and your territory is everything. Let's introduce a fashionably weird piece of Roman social life, the dinner party wardrobe. It was not unheard of for wealthy Romans to change their togas multiple times during a single banquet, each outfit more splendid than the last. This was called a synthesis. It was a way to show off wealth and sophistication, but it also had a practical element. Dinner parties could get messy. As emperor, your changes of costume would be even more significant. You might start the meal in a formal toga and end it in a more relaxed, colorful Greek-styled inner garment. Each change would be a signal, a shift in mood from formal state business to private entertainment, and your guests would have to adjust their own behavior accordingly. By the end of the evening, Senator Varro will leave your palace with his wife. He will have been treated with the utmost superficial respect. He will have eaten the finest food and drunk the best wine, and he will feel utterly and completely defeated. You have demonstrated that you can take whatever you want, whenever you want. You have shown him that his honor, his family, his very standing in the world are all held in the palm of your hand. You didn't need to shout or threaten. You just had to host a dinner party. The academic debate here is, naturally, about the frequency and literalness of these accounts. Were these humiliating displays a common political tool, or were they rare, shocking events that were recorded precisely because they were so exceptional? Did every emperor engage in this? Or was it only the ones later branded as tyrants? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The potential for such humiliation was always there, a constant, unspoken threat that hung over the entire Roman elite. You didn't have to use the weapon for everyone to know it was in your arsenal. As you watch Varro and Dumidi depart, you feel a cold sense of satisfaction. You have secured your flank. You have neutralized a rival. You have done it without raising a sword or an army. But this victory has cost you another piece of your humanity. You have used a human being, Dumidi, as a pawn in your game, and you have eroded the dignity of another Varro. The more you play this game, the more you come to see people not as fellow Romans, but as instruments of your will. You wake up the next day with the satisfying memory of Senator V. or Ross' quiet capitulation. The subtle game of dominance you played was a success, and it gets you thinking not just about your personal power over individuals, but about your power over the system itself, specifically the laws governing marriage, adultery, and family life, the very bedrock of Roman society. You, as emperor, don't just get to break these laws, you get to rewrite them. Or, more powerfully, you simply ignore them, and your behavior becomes the new unwritten law. This is a critical point in the journey. Your predecessor, Augustus, actually prided himself on being a great moral reformer. He enacted a series of laws known as the Julian laws on marriage and adultery. These were a core part of his public image. He wanted to restore the old-fashioned, family-focused virtues of the Republic. The laws encouraged marriage, penalized the unmarried and childless, and, for the first time, made adultery a public crime. Before Augustus, adultery was a private family matter, dealt with by the head of the family. The paterfamilias Augustus made it the state's business. A husband was now legally required to divorce and prosecute his adulterous wife. If he failed to do so, he could be prosecuted himself for pimping. These laws were strict, puritanical, and, for the Roman elite, incredibly annoying. But they were the law of the land, for everyone except you. You are legibus solitus, released from the laws. You could have a dozen mistresses, and it would not be adultery. You could engage in acts that would see any other citizen hauled before a magistrate, and for you, it is simply a Tuesday. This hypocrisy was not lost on the Romans. The most glaring example was Augustus himself. While he was busy exilling his own daughter, Julia, for her flagrant violations of his adultery laws, his critics, like Mark Antony, had long accused him of rampant womanizing. The man who criminalized adultery was, according to his enemies, one of the biggest adulterers in Rome. You can feel this contradiction in your own life. You are the chief priest of Rome, the Pontifex Maximus. You are the upholder of public morality. You are expected to be a model of Roman virtue. Yet, in the privacy of your palace, you are entirely unbound by that morality. Let's watch this power in action. You've grown tired of your current wife. The alliance she represents is no longer useful. Or perhaps you've simply found someone you desire more. For any other Roman citizen, divorce was possible but often complicated, involving dowries, family negotiations, and social fallout. For you, it's a matter of paperwork. You can divorce your wife with a simple declaration. You can then marry another woman the next day. You could even force another man to divorce his wife so that you can marry her, a move that several of your predecessors pulled. The Emperor Tiberius, for instance, was compelled by Augustus to divorce his beloved wife, Vi Pisania, and marry Augustus' daughter Julia. It was a purely political move, and by all accounts, it broke Tiberius' heart. He was seen only once more by Vi Pisania, and he followed her with his eyes, weeping until his attendants pulled him away. This story illustrates that even an emperor could be on the receiving end of this kind of power play before he got to the top. Now, you are the one who can command such things. The legal framework is your plaything. And this extends to the most taboo areas. Let's talk about incest. Roman law, like most, strictly forbade incestuous relationships, but when the Emperor Caligula decided to have his sisters as his lovers, particularly his favorite Drusilla, what law could stop him? He treated Drusilla as his legal wife, had her seated next to him at banquets in the seat of honor normally reserved for the empress. And when she died, he had her deified. made into a goddess. He simply acted as if the rules did not exist, and in doing so, created a new reality around himself. Now for a wonderfully strange and niche bit of Roman law. Let's talk about the legal status of actors and entertainers. In Rome, if you chose to be an actor, mime, or gladiator, you became infames. This was a legal category. It meant you lost most of your rights as a citizen. You couldn't vote. You couldn't represent yourself in court, and your testimony was considered unreliable. You were, in the eyes of the law, socially degraded. So when emperors like Nero or Commodus decided to go on stage or fight in the arena, they were willingly taking on the status of infames. This was part of what so deeply scandalized the Senate. The emperor, the source of all law and honor, was voluntarily adopting the legal status of the most dishonorable people in society. It was a complete inversion of the social and legal order. This is where the debate among historians gets really interesting. Did emperors like Caligula truly have romantic or sexual relationships with their sisters, or was this a piece of malicious propaganda? A classic smear tactic used to posthumously paint an enemy as a monster. Some scholars suggest that Caligula's public displays of affection for his sisters might have been an attempt to emulate the royal families of Hellenistic Egypt, like the Ptolemies, where sibling marriage was a common practice to keep the bloodline pure. Was he trying to introduce a foreign, kingly custom to Rome, or was he just a depraved tyrant? The evidence is too thin, the sources too biased, for us to ever know for sure. As you sit in your study, a scroll of your great-uncle Augustus's moral legislation open on the table before you, you can't help but smile at the irony. The laws are for the little people. They are the fences that keep the sheep in the pasture. But you are the shepherd, or perhaps the wolf. You are the living law, and what you do, by definition, cannot be illegal. The danger, of course, is that a man who believes he cannot do anything illegal may eventually believe he cannot do anything wrong. And that is a very dangerous belief for the most powerful person in the world to hold. You're starting to get a strange feeling, a prickle on the back of your neck. You are the most powerful man in the world, and your palace is a fortress. But you're realizing that its walls are porous. Every decree you sign, every private letter you send, every angry word you shout at a servant, every scandalous thing you do behind closed doors, it feels like someone is taking notes. You have this creeping suspicion that your life story is being written in real time by 1,000 invisible scribes, and you're not wrong. But the man who will truly define your legacy for millennia to come hasn't even been born yet. Let's step out of your timeline for a moment and jump forward about a century. Let's meet the man responsible for most of the juicy, scandalous, and downright bizarre stories we know about the early emperors. His name is Gaius Suetonius Tranquil, and you can think of him as the ancient world's premier gossip columnist. He is the founding father of the political tell-all biography, the TMZ of the Tiber. Suetonius was an equestrian, a member of the social class just below the senators. He was a scholar, an archivist, and for a time, a high-ranking imperial secretary under the Emperor Hadrian. This is the first crucial thing to understand about him, and it's our key historical fact. He wasn't just repeating marketplace rumors. As Hadrian's secretary, in charge of correspondence of Bepis to the kingdom, he had access to the imperial archives. He could read the private letters of Augustus, the military reports of Tiberius, the frantic decrees of Caligula. He had access to the raw data of your life. He could see the receipts. And what did he do with this incredible access? He wrote a book called De Vita Caesar, or the Lives of the 12 Caesars. It's a collection of biographies from Julius Caesar to Domitian, and it is one of the most entertaining, influential, and deeply problematic history books ever written. It's the reason we know that Caligula tried to make his horse a consul, that Nero fiddled while Rome burned, he actually played the lyre, and that Tiberius engaged in sordid activities in his island retirement on Capri. Now here's the quirky detail about Suetonius that makes his work so unique and so frustrating for modern historians. He didn't write his biographies chronologically. A modern biography would go, he was born, he did that, then he did that, then he died. Suetonius found that boring. Instead, he organized his material thematically, by category. HED had a section on the emperor's family background, then his military campaigns, then his public works, and then HED get to the good stuff, a section on their personal habits, a section on their appearance and health, a section on their supposed sexual depravities, and a list of the omens that predicted their death. This structure turns his biographies into personality profiles, not historical narratives. It disconnects actions from their context. An emperor might have done something cruel or bizarre in a moment of extreme political pressure, but Suetonius will just pluck it out and file it under the category examples of cruelty. This makes for sensational reading, but it's terrible for understanding the why. It's the difference between a nuanced psychological portrait and a hastily compiled list of someone's worst moments. This leads us directly to the great, eternal debate that surrounds Suetonius. Is he a historian or a tabloid journalist? Academics have been fighting over this for centuries. On one hand, he had access to primary sources that are now lost to us. We can't just dismiss him. On the other hand, his goal was clearly to entertain and to judge. He loved a good, scandalous story, and he rarely let a lack of corroborating evidence get in the way. He reports rumors alongside documented facts, often without distinguishing between the two. He'll write some say that, or it is believed that, and then proceed to tell you an absolutely wild story that may have no basis in reality. His personal life even adds to the intrigue. Here's a little bonus piece of gossip about the gossip himself. Suetonius was eventually fired by the Emperor Hadrian. The official reason is lost, but a later source claims it was for showing too much familiarity and a lack of etiquette toward the Empress Sabina. Nobody knows exactly what that means, but it could range from being too chatty with her to some other, more serious breach of protocol. The man who chronicled the imperial scandal may have been brought down by a minor court scandal of his own. The irony is delicious. So now, let's bring it back to you, the emperor, sitting in your palace. You can control armies, laws, and the lives of millions. But you are utterly powerless over this man Suetonius, who will one day sit in a quiet library, sifting through the detritus of your reign. He won't care as much about your brilliant tax reform or your carefully negotiated peace treaty on the Parthian border. He'll be looking for the juicy stuff. That embarrassing incident at that one banquet. The rumors about your odd sleeping habits. The angry letter you wrote to your brother. That's what will make it into his book. That will become your legacy. You are living your life, but he is the one who will write your story, and his version, full of sex, scandal, and sensationalism, will be so compelling that it will be the one that survives for 2,000 years. It's a chilling thought. You can conquer the world, but you can't control the narrative. And the man holding the pen is always, in the end, more powerful than the man holding the sword. Let's turn the page of your imperial diary and talk about one of your predecessors, a young man whose name has become a synonym for insane, unchecked tyranny. Caligula. Before you became emperor, you would have known the stories. Every aristocrat in Rome knew the stories. They were whispered at dinner parties, alluded to in nervous jokes. His reign was a 4-year-long cautionary tale, a masterclass in how spectacularly things can go wrong. To understand Caligula, you have to understand the hope that preceded him. This is the main historical point. He wasn't born a monster in the eyes of the people. He was the son of Germanicus, one of the most beloved Roman generals of all time. Germanicus was handsome, charismatic, a war hero, the perfect Roman. When he died young, the entire empire mourned. Caligula, the last surviving son. He grew up in military camps, and his name, Caligula, was actually a nickname. It means little boots, from the miniature military sandals Caligula he wore as a child. He was the army's darling, the people's hope, the living heir to their fallen hero. When the gloomy, reclusive, and deeply unpopular emperor Tiberius finally died, Rome rejoiced. And in his place came this handsome, charismatic young man. His ascension was met with a wave of euphoria. Coins were minted hailing him as the son of the army. The people loved him. The Senate, at first, loved him. He gave out bonuses to the Praetorian Guard, put on lavish games, and repealed some of Tiberius's more unpopular taxes. It seemed like a golden age was dawning, and then something snapped. About 7 months into his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill. Suetonius describes a national crisis. The palace was surrounded day and night by anxious citizens. People made vows to offer their own lives if only the young emperor would recover. And he did recover. But according to the ancient historians, the man who emerged from the sickbed was not the same one who went in. He was different, darker, erratic. Megalomaniacal. This is where the infamous stories begin. The stories of incest with his sisters. The stories of him ordering statues of himself to be placed in the temple at Jerusalem, an act of sacrilege that nearly sparked a massive revolt. The story of him declaring war on the sea, ordering his soldiers to march into the waves and plunder it by collecting seashells in their helmets. And, of course, the most famous story of all, his horse, Insiditus. Suetonius claims that Caligula loved this horse so much that he gave him a marble stall, a jeweled collar, a retinue of servants, and even fed him oats mixed with gold flakes. The punchline, the detail everyone remembers, is that he supposedly planned to make the horse a consul, the highest office in the Roman Republic. Let's pause here for our quirky detail, which is Insiditus himself. The name means swift or at a gallop. The horse was reportedly a prize-winning chariot racer from Spain. Caligula's obsession was so great that the night before a race, he would impose a city-wide silence enforced by soldiers so that nothing would disturb the horse's rest. To own a champion racehorse was a symbol, like owning a championship-winning sports team today. Caligula's actions were an extreme, almost insane, version of this common aristocratic obsession. Now we get to the great historical debate. Did any of this really happen, especially the horse consul story? Many modern historians think this is a classic example of a hostile source, like Suetonius, taking something out of context and twisting it. They suggest a more likely scenario: Caligula, in his growing contempt for the Senate, might have made a sarcastic, contemptuous remark. He might have said something along the lines of, "My horse could do a better job than you lot, or I might as well make my horse a consul for all the good you do." It was a bitter joke, a way of expressing his disgust with the senators he saw as sycophantic and useless. But a good joke can be easily twisted into a literal account of madness when you're writing for a sensationalist audience. So was he clinically insane, or was he a ruthless autocrat with a terrifyingly black sense of humor, deliberately trying to humiliate his enemies? We will never know for sure. What we do know is that his behavior systematically alienated everyone. He squandered the treasury on lavish projects and parties. He humiliated senators, as we've discussed, by forcing them to run alongside his chariot for miles or by treating them as personal servants. He executed rivals on flimsy charges of treason. He turned on the Praetorian Guard, the very soldiers who had put him in power. You, as emperor, can learn a lot from his mistakes. He took the abstract concept of being above the law and made it his entire personality. He seemed to believe he was a literal god, and he demanded to be worshipped as such. He didn't just break the rules of Roman society, he took a gleeful, theatrical pleasure in shattering them in the most public and insulting way possible. The end was predictable. He had stripped everyone of their dignity: the Senate, the army, the people. And a man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous man. In January of 41 AD, after less than 4 years in power, Caligula was assassinated by a conspiracy of Praetorian Guard officers and senators. They cornered him in a secluded palace corridor and stabbed him to death. They didn't just kill him, They also murdered his wife and his infant daughter, smashing the baby's head against a wall to ensure that the line of Germanicus was well and truly extinguished. The story of Caligula is a ghost that haunts your palace. It's a reminder of how quickly the love of the people can turn to hatred, and how absolute power, without any restraint or self-awareness, inevitably leads to a bloody end. It teaches you that there is a line, and that crossing it doesn't just make you an enemy of the state, it makes you a target. Walking through the vast, echoing halls of your palace, you become acutely aware that this isn't just a home or a seat of government. It's a city unto itself, a complex ecosystem teeming with a population dedicated entirely to you. We've talked about the servants, the guards, the advisors. But now let's pull the camera back and look at the sheer scale of what could be called your imperial harem. Though could be called your imperial harem, though that's a word borrowed from other cultures. For you, it was simply your familia, your household. And your household was a microcosm of the Roman Empire itself, a vast, multicultural collection of people, all bound to your will. This household wasn't just a handful of personal attendants. It was hundreds, maybe even thousands of individuals. The majority of them were slaves. This is the central, inescapable fact of your luxurious life. It is built on the foundation of human bondage. Slaves woke you in the morning, dressed you, cooked for you, cleaned for you, entertained you, and guarded you. They came from every corner of the known world. A towering, blonde German might be your bodyguard. A quick-witted Greek would be your scribe or your children's tutor. A skilled cook from Syria would prepare your meals. An elegant woman from Egypt might be in charge of your wife's cosmetics. Your palace was a living map of your empire's conquests. Each slave was a testament to Roman military and economic power. Within this slave population, there was a strict hierarchy. At the top were the highly educated, untrusted administrators, men who might run the palace finances or manage your vast agricultural estates. They could be incredibly powerful and wealthy themselves, even though they were legally someone else's property. At the bottom were the menial laborers, the cleaners, the kitchen staff who toiled in smoky, hot conditions. Then there were the concubines. For a Roman emperor, having female companions outside of marriage was not only accepted but expected. A concubine was a recognized social status. It wasn't the same as being a prostitute. A man, especially a powerful man, could have a long-term, stable, and even affectionate relationship with a concubine. Often, these women were freed slaves liberty. Any children from such a union would be free, but would not have the same inheritance rights as a legitimate child born to your wife. It was a way for you to have companionship and intimacy without the political complications of another marriage. And this brings us to a wonderfully odd and specific detail of Roman life, the color of a slave. If you saw a slave on the street, they might be wearing a metal collar around their neck. Some of these have been found by archaeologists. The typical inscription on such a collar might read 10, Amini Fugiam et revocami adominum meum, viventum in area calist, I, which translates to hold me, lest I flee, and return me to my master vive entias on the estate of Callistus. It's a chillingly casual artifact, a metal dog tag for a human being, a constant physical reminder of their status as property. While your high-ranking palace slaves might not wear such a crude device, the legal reality was the same. Beyond the concubines, your household would include a whole constellation of other people acquired for their beauty or talents. Musicians, dancers, acrobats, poets. You might hear of a boy in Alexandria with a heavenly singing voice, and you would simply buy him and have him shipped to Rome. He becomes part of your collection. This is where the lines get incredibly blurry. These talented individuals were part slave, part court entertainer, part personal companion. Their status was ambiguous, entirely dependent on your favor. This vast collection of people was not just for your pleasure, it was a reflection of your status. The more exotic, beautiful, and talented people you owned, the more powerful you appeared. It was conspicuous consumption, But with human beings, this created a hotbed of intense competition and intrigue. Everyone in your household, from the highest-ranking freedman advisor to the newest slave girl, was locked in a constant, silent battle for your attention and favor. A kind word from you could elevate someone's status instantly. A look of displeasure could mean being sold off to a salt mine. And this is where historians get into a fascinating debate. How much power did these members of the imperial household actually wield? The traditional, snobbish view, from senators like Tacitus, was that emperors who listened to their slaves and freedmen were weak and corrupt. They complained bitterly about government by slaves. They saw men like Palatine and Narcissus, the powerful freedmen who essentially ran the empire under Emperor Claudius, as a perversion of the natural order. But other historians argue that this was a practical necessity. The Roman Empire had become too large and complex to be run by a small group of bickering aristocrats. The emperors needed a professional, loyal civil service. And since they couldn't fully trust the senators who were their rivals, they created this bureaucracy out of their own household staff people whose loyalty was, in theory, guaranteed because their entire existence depended on the emperor. So, was the rise of the freedmen administrators a sign of imperial decadence, or was it a pragmatic and necessary innovation in governance? The argument continues to this day. As you look around your palace, you see the faces. The German guard staring blankly ahead. The Greek scribe meticulously copying a scroll. The Syrian girl arranging flowers in a vase. They are the invisible engine that runs your world. They are your property, your collection, your staff, and your biggest source of political strength and weakness. They see everything. They know your secrets. They know your secrets. And each one of them has their own quiet hopes, fears, and ambitions, all swirling around the gravitational center of you. Your harem is not a pleasure den. It's the most complex and dangerous political arena you will ever navigate. Within the complex human ecosystem of your palace, there's a specific category of companion that deserves its own spotlight, one that modern sensibilities often find uncomfortable or confusing: the cat amid, or the young male lover. To you, as a Roman emperor, the presence of beautiful young men and boys in your inner circle would be no more remarkable than the presence of beautiful young women. It was simply another facet of the power and luxury afforded to you. To understand this, we have to revisit the Roman concept of sexual morality we touched on earlier. The key principle was not the gender of the partner, but the preservation of one's own masculine social standing. For an adult Roman man, especially one of high status, to be sexually attracted to and engage with a youth pure in Latin was considered normal. It was an expression of taste, much like preferring a certain type of wine or art. The crucial factor was the age and status difference. The ideal object of this desire was a boy in his mid to late teens, typically a slave or a foreigner, someone of a lower social station. This dynamic was heavily influenced by Greek culture, which the Romans both admired and were slightly suspicious of. In places like Athens, a formal relationship between an older man Aristes and a youthy Romanos was a recognized social institution, supposedly educational and mentoring in nature. Though it certainly had a physical component, the Romans adopted a simplified, less philosophical version of this. For them, it was less about mentorship and more about pleasure and aesthetics. So, in your palace, you would have a number of these young men. They would be chosen for their beauty, their grace, their wit. They would serve you wine at banquets, attend you at the baths, and share your bed. They were, in essence, living works of art, acquired and displayed to enhance your prestige. The Emperor Hadrian, a devoted Philhellene lover of all things Greek, had the most famous of these relationships with a beautiful young man from Bithynia named Antinous. Hadrian's love for Antinous was by all accounts deep and genuine. When Antinous tragically drowned in the Nile River, a heartbroken Hadrian deified him, naming a city after him Anti-N-Oopolis and commissioning hundreds, if not thousands, of statues in his likeness. The sheer number of surviving statues of Antinous is a testament to the depth of Hadrian's grief and the immense resources at his command. This relationship between Hadrian and Antinous is our central historical example. It shows the apex of this particular institution. It was public, it was celebrated, and it was immortalized in art and architecture. However, this acceptance had its limits. The relationship was supposed to be a temporary phase in the youth's life. Once the boy began to show signs of full manhood, a deepening voice, a beard, the relationship was expected to end. For him to continue in the passive role into adulthood was seen as shameful and degrading. And for the older man, the emperor, to be the passive partner with anyone was the ultimate disgrace. It was a complete inversion of the power dynamic. Rumors of this nature were the most potent poison in Roman politics. For example, Suetonius gleefully reports that the young Julius Caesar, during his time at the court of King Nicomedes of Bithynia, served as the king's cupbearer and shared his bed, implying he took the passive role. This rumor dogged Caesar for his entire political career. His enemies would call him the Queen of Bithynia as a political insult. Now for our quirky, specific detail: the importance of the first beard. The first time a Roman boy shaved was a major life event, a rite of passage into manhood called the depositio barba. It was celebrated with a religious ceremony and a party. For a youth in your service, this moment would be a crisis. His transition to manhood would mean the end of his privileged position as your favorite. His value was intrinsically tied to his youthfulness. What happened to them afterwards? Some might be given their freedom and a sum of money to start a new life. Others might be trained for a different role in the palace administration, but their time in the sun was over. This leads to the academic debate. How much of the Roman view on this was genuine aesthetic appreciation, and how much was it just another form of exploitation and power display? Some scholars, looking at the poetry of Catullus or the art celebrating Antinous, see evidence of genuine affection in a complex emotional world. They argue that we shouldn't judge these relationships solely by modern standards. Other scholars are more critical. They point out that the youth, who was almost always a slave, had absolutely no say in the matter. Their body was not their own. They were groomed and used for the pleasure of a powerful man, and their career was brutally short. From this perspective, it's impossible to separate the practice from the fundamental power imbalance of slavery. As the emperor, you wouldn't be troubled by such debates. You would see a beautiful boy, perhaps a captured prince from a distant land, and you would desire him. You would add him to your household. You would shower him with gifts and favor, enjoying his beauty and companionship for a few short years. You might even feel a real affection for him. But this affection would always be framed by the absolute power you hold over him. He is yours. His purpose is to please you. And when his youthful bloom fades, he will be replaced. It is the natural order of your world, a world where beauty is a commodity and youth is a resource to be consumed. The stories of your predecessors echo in the palace corridors, serving as both inspiration and warning. And no story is more strange, more tragic, or more revealing of the extremes of imperial power than that of the Emperor Nero and his bride, Sporus. This isn't just a tale of a boy favorite, it's a story that pushes the boundaries of law, identity, and the emperor's ability to literally reshape reality to fit his desires. The stage for this bizarre drama was set by a personal tragedy in Nero's life. He was married to the Empress Papa Sabina, a woman he was reportedly obsessed with. The accounts say that in a fit of rage, Nero kicked a pregnant Papa, leading to her death. Whether this is true or another exaggeration from hostile historians is debatable, but what is certain is that Papa died, and Nero was consumed with a grief that bordered on madness. It was in the depths of this grief that he found Sporus. Sporus was a young boy, a pure delicatus, likely a freedman or a slave in the palace, who bore a striking resemblance to the dead empress. Nero became fixated on him, but his desire went far beyond simply taking the boy as a lover. He wanted to resurrect Papa. He wanted to make Sporus into her. This is where the story takes its darkest turn, and it becomes our central historical event for this chapter. Nero, the man for whom no law applied, decided he would marry Sporus. But to make this twisted fantasy complete, Sporus had to become a woman. So, Nero commanded his physicians to perform an operation on the boy castration. This act removed S3X masculinity, making him, in the Roman view, a permanent eunuch, forever trapped in a state of prepubescence. Nero then staged a full, public wedding ceremony. Sporus was dressed as a bride, complete with the traditional red veil, the flammum he was given a dowry. There was a wedding contract. The couple was escorted through the streets of Rome and even Greece with a massive entourage, just as an emperor and his new empress would be. Nero called Sporus Palatine and later Sabina. He insisted that courtiers treat Sporus with all the deference and titles due to an empress. Imagine the scene. A Roman senator, a man of immense dignity and pride, having to bow his head and address this young, mutilated boy as Augusta Empress. It was a breathtaking act of political theater, a calculated humiliation of the entire Roman elite. Nero wasn't just breaking the rules, he was rubbing everyone's face and his power to do so. He was demonstrating that his will was so absolute, he could redefine the most fundamental categories of human existence, man and woman, husband and wife at his whim. Now for a peculiar, related detail: the eunuch in Roman society. While castration was technically illegal under Roman law, a law that Nero, of course, ignored, eunuchs were an own commodity in the ancient world, often imported from the East. They were highly prized as servants, especially in households with women, as they were seen as safe. But they held a deeply ambiguous status. They weren't men, but they weren't women. They were often viewed with a mixture of pity, contempt, and fascination. There was even a specific term for priests of the goddess Cybele, known as Galli, who would ritually castrate themselves in a state of religious frenzy. These figures were part of the Roman religious landscape, but they were seen as exotic and unnerving. For Nero to force this status onto his favorite and then elevate him to the position of empress was a shocking conflation of a marginalized identity with the highest seat of power. The story of Sporus has been a source of endless debate for historians. What was Nero's motivation? Was it a genuine, albeit deeply disturbed, expression of grief for Palatine? Was he so lost in a fantasy world that he truly believed he could transform this boy into his dead wife? Was it a calculated political act? Some historians argue the latter. They suggest that this marriage was the ultimate act of contempt for the senatorial class. By forcing them to participate in this charade, Nero was showing them that all their traditions, all their values, all their definitions of propriety were meaningless. He could make a boy an empress, and they would have to smile and accept it. It was power for the sake of power, a demonstration of dominance so complete that it bordered on performance art. The fate of Sporus is as tragic as his story. He became a living symbol of Nero's excesses. After Nero was overthrown and committed suicide, S3X's life became a nightmare. He was passed between the next short-lived emperors like a trophy. One commander tried to force him to reenact the rape of Proserpina in the arena for public entertainment. Finally, the Emperor Vitellius planned to use Sporus in a gladiatorial spectacle, forcing him to play the part of a maiden being attacked. Faced with this ultimate public humiliation, Sporus took his own life. He was probably not yet 20 years old. As you, the Emperor, reflect on this story, you see the ultimate danger of unchecked power. It's not just about indulging your appetites. It's about your appetites consuming the lives of those around you. Nero's fantasy required the complete destruction of another human being, his identity, his body, his future. Sporus was an object, a prop in Nero's personal psychodharma. The story is a chilling reminder that when you have the power to create your own reality, you often have to destroy someone else's to do so. The nightly banquets in your palace have become a staple of your reign, a predictable rhythm of power and politics. But tonight, you're feeling that familiar itch of boredom again. The polite conversation of senators, the carefully portioned dishes, The restrained music, it all feels so tame. You want to host something different. Something memorable. Something that people will talk about for years. You decide to throw a real party. A comisadia or Roman drinking party, but on a scale that only an emperor could achieve. A truly notorious imperial revel. Let's set the scene. You don't hold this party in one of your formal dining rooms. That's too stuffy. Instead, you order it to be set up in a more extravagant location. Maybe you build a temporary dining barge and float it on an artificial lake in your gardens, like your predecessor Nero was said to have done. Or perhaps you take over a public square, clearing it of commoners and transforming it into your private playground for the night. The venue itself is a statement: I can turn any part of this city into my personal property. The guest list is eclectic and intentionally provocative. Yes, the usual senators and aristocrats are there. But you've also invited a mix of famous actors, celebrated charioteras, notorious courtesans, and even a few celebrity gladiators. You are deliberately blurring the lines between high society and the infamous world of entertainers. The respectable nobleman is forced to recline on a couch next to a man he might have paid to watch die in the arena last week. The senator's wife finds herself sharing a plate of spiced dates with a woman whose scandalous reputation is the talk of Rome. The social order is deliberately scrambled, and the only rule is your whim. As the host, you are not the aloof, dignified emperor of the formal banquet. You are the Rex Biebendi, the king of the drinking, a role chosen by a roll of the dice at traditional Roman parties. You dictate the toasts, you set the pace of the drinking, and you devise the entertainment. The wine flows, not from delicate pitchers, but from massive silver craters, and it's mixed stronger than usual. The music is louder, played by exotic musicians on strange instruments from the eastern provinces. The entertainment is not a troupe of Virgilian poets. Instead, you have mimes perform satirical, risque plays that openly mock well-known senators who are present in the room and forced to laugh along. You have acrobats performing dangerous, breathtaking feats. You might even have a small-scale, non-lethal gladiatorial match fought in the center of the room. The goal is to overwhelm the senses, to break down inhibitions, to create an atmosphere of controlled chaos. This kind of extravagant, rule-breaking party is a hallmark of the bad emperors in the historical record. Suetonius describes the parties of Caligula and Nero in lurid detail. One of the most famous accounts is of a banquet thrown by the Emperor Vitellius, who was renowned for his gluttony. Suetonius claims that Vitellius would attend multiple banquets in a single day, inviting himself to the homes of various nobles, who were expected to produce feasts costing astronomical sums. The most famous dish he supposedly invented was the Shield of Minerva, a massive platter containing a disgusting-sounding mixture of pike livers, pheasant brains, peacock brains, flamingo tongues, and lamprey milt, with ingredients sourced from every corner of the empire. This dish is our quirky detail of the day. While it sounds almost cartoonish like gross, it perfectly illustrates the point of such imperial extravagance. The goal was not necessarily deliciousness, it was to display power. The ability to command the rarest, most expensive ingredients from Parthia to Britain into a single, absurd dish was a definitive statement of your global reach and infinite resources. It was a geography lesson served on a silver platter. Of course, as the night wears on and the wine takes its toll, the atmosphere can shift from festive to menacing. Your jokes might take a cruel turn. You might innocently spill wine on a senator's pristine white toga. You might command a respected nobleman to perform a foolish dance for the other guests. This is where the party becomes a loyalty test. Can your guests endure your whims? Can they stomach the humiliation with a smile? Their ability to grovel gracefully is a measure of their submission to your authority. This is the part that historians argue about. Were these parties really the debauched orgies depicted by moralizing writers like Suetonius and Tacitus, or were they just lavish affairs that were later exaggerated by political enemies? The truth is probably a bit of both. The Roman elite certainly enjoyed their wine and their luxuries. and absolute power does tend to corrupt. It's not hard to imagine an emperor, drunk on both wine and his own importance, pushing the boundaries of decency. The most extreme stories of forcing high-born citizens into sexual acts or staging elaborate, cruel games might be later inventions designed to blacken a dead emperor's name. The charge of luxury and debauchery was a standard political attack in Rome. As your own party reaches its peak, you look out at the scene you've created. You see a senator laughing a little too loudly at your joke. You see a noble woman averting her eyes as a lewd play unfolds. You see the flickering torchlight reflecting in the wide, nervous eyes of your guests. They are having the time of their lives, and they are terrified. They are caught in the strange gravity of your power, a force that provides them with unparalleled luxury while simultaneously stripping them of their dignity. You have given them a night they will never forget, but you have also reminded them of their place. They are merely guests in your world, and you can change the rules of the party at any moment. Your desire for novelty and control is beginning to chafe against the very walls of your palace. The sprawling complex, your home, your office, your fortress, but it still feels constrained by a certain level of imperial decorum. You want to create a space that is purely about pleasure, a place free from the lingering ghosts of senatorial meetings and political decorum. An idea inspired by the scandalous whispers about your predecessor Caligula begins to take shape in your mind. You will create a house of pleasure within the house of power. You will establish your own private brothel inside the palace walls. Now, this is one of the most shocking accusations leveled against any emperor, and it's our core historical topic for this chapter. According to Suetonius, the Emperor Caligula, having squandered the imperial treasury on his extravagant projects, needed to raise funds. His solution, the historian claims, was to convert a wing of the palace into a high-class brothel. He supposedly furnished it with opulent decorations and staffed it with high-born ladies and the young sons of the nobility, essentially forcing them into prostitution. He would then send his attendants out into the Roman Forum to invite, or rather, summon men of all ages and classes to come and patronize the imperial establishment. Let's unpack this accusation. The act itself is a masterpiece of symbolic degradation. The palace, the sacred heart of the empire, is transformed into a lupa, nere, the Latin word for a brothel, which literally means wolf den. The wives and children of the aristocracy, the very people who defined Roman honor, are made into commercial objects, and the emperor himself takes on the role of Elena, a pimp or brothel keeper, one of the most despised professions in Roman society. Caligula wasn't just raising money, he was launching a symbolic nuclear attack on the Roman social order. So, you decide to follow in these legendary footsteps, but perhaps with more discretion. You select a small, secluded suite of rooms in a distant corner of the palace. You have them redecorated, not with the formal grandeur of the staterooms, but with a more decadent, sensual style, silks from the east, provocative mosaics on the floor, soft lighting from dozens of scented oil lamps. You don't need to force noble women into service. Your harem, your vast collection of slaves and concubines from across the empire, is at your disposal. You select the most beautiful and charming individuals to staff this little sanctuary. A skilled musician from Greece, a dancer from Spain, a woman from Egypt famed for her wit. They are not just there for sex, they are there to create an atmosphere of perfect, cultivated pleasure. This brings us to a fascinating, unquirky detail about real Roman brothels. Archaeologists in Pompeii have unearthed several, and they've learned a lot about how they operated. The walls were often covered in explicit paintings, a sort of visual menu of the services on offer. Each prostitute worked out of a tiny, stone-built cell, barely large enough for a narrow bed, and above the door of each cell, there was often a plaque with the woman's name and her price. The level of organization was startlingly businesslike. Your palace establishment, of course, would be infinitely more luxurious, but it would be tapping into a well-understood, if lowly, part of Roman urban life. Who are the clients at your palace brothel? Not the general public, of course. That would be too risky, too crude. The clientele is you. And maybe, just maybe, your most trusted inner circle. You might bring a favored military commander or a loyal courtier to this secret place as a sign of ultimate favor. To be invited into the emperor's private den of pleasure is a terrifying and intoxicating honor. It binds that person to you with secrets that could destroy you both. It becomes another to love. Inside this sanctuary, you are not the emperor. You can shed the heavy toga of state and slip into something more comfortable. Here, you are the master of the feast, the ultimate connoisseur of pleasure. The power dynamic is still there. Of course, it never leaves, but its expression is different. It's not about public humiliation, but about private indulgence. Now, we must confront the big academic question: did Caligula's palace brothel actually exist? The story comes almost exclusively from Suetonius, with a few mentions in other hostile sources. Many historians are deeply skeptical. They argue that this is the ultimate smear. What better way to posthumously destroy an emperor's reputation than to accuse him of being a pimp? It's a charge that is almost impossible to disprove and so shocking that it sticks in the mind forever. These historians suggest the story might be a grotesque exaggeration of something more mundane. Caligula was in desperate need of money. He raised it through a variety of unpopular means: false treason charges to confiscate estates, new taxes on everything from food to legal services. He may have even levied a specific tax on prostitutes and their earnings, a practice that other emperors certainly engaged in. It's possible that his enemies took this tax on sin and twisted it into the much more memorable story of him becoming a literal pimp. It's a classic example of how a kernel of truth can be spun into a monstrous legend. But as you recline on a silk-draped couch in your own secret suite, the historical truth of the matter feels less important than the psychological truth. The existence of this space, whether real for Caligula or imagined for yourself, represents a final, decisive break. You have walled off a part of your life where the normal rules of the outside world of politics, of dignity, of honor, no longer apply. It's a space where your desires are the only law. The danger is that the walls of such a place are never as solid as they seem. The mindset you cultivate within it, the idea that people are merely instruments for your pleasure, will inevitably leak out and poison the rest of your reign. The palace brothel was an interesting experiment, but even that is starting to lose its luster. The pleasures have become predictable. The pursuit of sensation requires ever-escalating doses. Your mind, sharpened by absolute power and dulled by endless indulgence, turns to a new challenge. You need to invent new ways to be entertained. You need to get creative. This is the phase of your reign where luxury coalesces into a strange, obsessive quest for the bizarre, where your vast resources are channeled into staging experiences no one else has ever imagined. Your quest for creative luxury isn't just about spending money, it's about defying the laws of nature and logistics. For instance, you decide you want to taste fresh strawberries in the middle of winter. For anyone else, this is impossible. For you, it's a command. You dispatch couriers on a relay of fast horses to the sunnier parts of the empire, with orders to bring back baskets of the fruit, kept fresh in chests packed with snow brought down from the highest mountain peaks. The cost is astronomical. The logistics are a nightmare. Most of the fruit probably spoils. But a single, perfect red berry arrives on a golden plate for your breakfast. You have bent the seasons to your will. The taste of the strawberry isn't the point, the taste of that power is. This kind of absurd, nature-defying luxury is a recurring theme in the lives of the more eccentric emperors. Let's talk about our main historical example for today, the Emperor Elagabalus. He ruled about a century and a half after Nero, but he took the concept of imperial weirdness to a whole new level. Elagabalus was a young Syrian priest of a sun god also named Elagabalus who, through a series of unlikely events, became the Emperor of Rome. He brought his foreign customs and his flamboyant, gender-bending persona to the state halls of the Palatine, and the Roman elite were utterly horrified and fascinated. The stories about Elagabalus' banquets, as told by the admittedly hostile Historia Augusta, are legendary. He would reportedly serve his guests imitation food, made of glass or ivory, watching with amusement as they tried to eat it. He would seat his least favorite guests on inflatable cushions that would be secretly deflated during the meal, dumping them unceremoniously onto the floor. But his most famous stunt is a perfect example of inventive cruelty mixed with aesthetic ambition. The story goes that at one of his banquets, he rigged the ceiling of the dining hall. At the climax of the feast, he released a literal avalanche of flower petals, roses, and violets down onto his guests. It sounds beautiful, a poetic and decadent gesture, but the sheer quantity of petals was so immense that it supposedly smothered some of the diners, who were too drunk or too slow to escape. They died, suffocated by flowers. This tale brings us to our quirky detail: the Roman obsession with roses. Roses were the ultimate luxury flower. They were used in everything: perfume, wine, food, and of course, decoration. Wealthy Romans would have rose water fountains and sleep on mattresses stuffed with rose petals. The phrase "to live on roses, vivere in rosa," was their equivalent of living in the lap of luxury. Elagabalus' fatal flower drop was a perversion of this common symbol of pleasure, turning an object of beauty into a weapon. Now, back to you. Inspired by these tales, you decide to stage your own masterpiece of creative indulgence. You announce a naval battle in Omaki to be held in the city, but not in an existing amphitheater. You command the excavation of a massive artificial basin on the banks of the Tiber. Thousands of workers toil for months to create your private sea. You then have dozens of real warships, captured from pirates or built for the occasion, moved into the basin. You staff them with thousands of condemned criminals and prisoners of war, and then you stage your show. The prisoners are divided into two fleets, perhaps the Rhodians and the Sicilians. They are then forced to fight a real, bloody battle to the death for the entertainment of you and the Roman populace. The water turns reed. The cheers of the crowd echo off the palace walls. It is history as theater, and death as a spectacle. Julius Caesar and Augustus both staged such massive nomaki, demonstrating on an unbelievable scale their power to command life, death, and even the landscape itself. The academic debate surrounding these stories, especially the morbis, are ones about emperors like Elagabalus, is intense. The Historia Augusta, our main source for his reign, is a notoriously unreliable document. Many scholars believe it's a work of satire or political fiction, written long after the events it describes. They argue that the stories of glass food and fatal flower falls are likely pure invention, designed to paint the foreign emperor as decadent and dangerously insane. Other historians, however, argue that while the details may be exaggerated, they reflect a kernel of truth about Elagabalus's shocking break with Roman tradition. Was he a performance artist challenging Roman norms, or just a very strange young man handed too much power? The debate rages on. Your own naval battle is a wild success. The people are awed by the scale of it. But as you watch the last few survivors being rounded up by your guards, a strange emptiness settles over you. You've done it. You've staged one of the greatest spectacles in Roman history. And now what's next? How do you top this? The quest for creative luxury is a trap. It's an arms race against your own boredom. Each new invention, each new defiance of nature, only serves to raise the bar for the next thrill. You've gone from wanting a rare piece of fruit to wanting to reshape the seasons. You've gone from watching gladiators to staging full-scale naval wars. The scope of your desires is expanding to fill the limitless space of your power. And you are beginning to realize that when you can have anything you can imagine, you start to imagine some very dark and dangerous things. The parties have been thrown, the creative cruelties have been explored, and the novelty of absolute indulgence is beginning to wear thin. A new kind of anxiety starts to creep into the quiet moments of your day. It's a cold, political reality that no amount of flamingo tongues or naval battles can make go away. It's the succession problem. You need an heir, a legitimate, healthy male heir. Without one, everything you have built or inherited is destined to crumble into civil war the moment you die. Suddenly, the focus of the entire empire, which has been scattered across your various whims and pleasures, contracts to a single point, your wife's womb. The imperial bedroom, the space you may have treated as a political necessity or a source of casual pleasure, is now the most important and high-stakes location in the Roman world. The pressure is immense. This is our core historical reality for this chapter: the desperate, often brutal, politics of the imperial succession. Rome never established a clear, fixed, and legal rule for who became the next emperor. There was no automatic system of primogeniture like in later European monarchies. The system was a messy, dangerous hybrid. You needed the support of the Senate, the loyalty of the army, especially the Praetorian Guard, and ideally a blood connection to the previous emperor. The easiest way to secure that last part was to have a son of your own. This turns the act of procreation into a public and political performance. Your virility and your wife's fertility are no longer private matters. They are indicators of the stability of the state. If months, and then years, go by without the announcement of a pregnancy, the whispers will start. Courtiers will exchange nervous glances. Senators will begin quietly hedging their bets, trying to guess who might emerge as a contender if you die childless. Ambitious generals on the frontier will start to look a little more ambitious. The lack of a pregnancy creates a power vacuum, and Roman politics, like nature, abhors a vacuum. Let's say your wife does become pregnant. The relief is immense, but it's immediately replaced by a new set of anxieties. The 9 months of her pregnancy are a period of national tension. The health of the empress becomes the paramount concern of the state. Teams of physicians monitor her every meal, every step. Public prayers and sacrifices are offered for a safe delivery. And then comes the birth. If the child is a girl, it's a qualified success. A daughter can be used to forge a powerful alliance by marrying her to a promising general or future successor. But it's not the ideal outcome. It kicks the can down the road. What everyone is holding their breath for is a boy. The moment a healthy son is born is a moment of triumph for the entire empire. You would announce the birth to the Senate. You would declare a public holiday and order lavish games. Coins would be struck immediately, bearing the image of the empress, as felicitous happiness, or with the infant heir in her arms, often with the inscription Spes Augusta, the hope of the Augustan line. These coins are our quirky historical detail. They were not just currency, they were propaganda, mass-produced announcements sent to every corner of the empire, declaring that the dynasty was secure, that the future was safe. A citizen in faraway Gaul might learn of the birth of your son simply by receiving a new sestertius coin in his change. But, even with the son, the anxiety doesn't end. In an age of high infant mortality, the child's first 2 years are fraught with peril. A simple fever, a childhood disease, what would be a private family tragedy for anyone else, is a catastrophic political crisis for you. And if you have multiple sons, that creates a whole new set of problems. Just look at the family of Marcus Aurelius, the great philosopher-emperor. He and his wife Faustina the Younger had at least 13 children, but many of them died young. They had several sons, including the infamous Commodus and his twin brother, who died at the age of 4. This large family was celebrated as a sign of imperial stability. The family was marketed as the Domus Divina, the divine household. Only the deeply unsuitable Commodus survived to adulthood to succeed his father, with disastrous results. This leads to the historical debate: was the Roman system of adoption better than the system of natural-born succession? The period of the 5 good emperors, from Nerva to Marcus Aurelius, is often held up as a golden age. A key feature of this era was that 4 of these 5 emperors did not have natural sons to succeed them. Instead, they adopted a talented, proven adult as their heir. Nerva adopted Hadrian. Trajan adopted Antoninus Pius, who who in turn adopted Marcus Aurelius. This system, based on merit rather than birth, seemed to produce a string of highly competent rulers. The problem came with Marcus Aurelius, who broke the chain. He had a natural son, Commodus, and he chose to pass power to him instead of adopting a more suitable candidate. Was this a fatal mistake driven by fatherly love, or was he simply bowing to the overwhelming political pressure to favor his own blood? Historians still argue about whether the Golden Age was a result of a brilliant system or just a lucky coincidence of biology. As you look at your own young son, sleeping in his cradle, you see not just your child, but a fragile vessel containing the future of Rome. You have created an heir, but you have also created a target. Every political rival will now see that child as the primary obstacle to their own ambition. The pressure to produce a successor is immense, but the pressure to protect him is even greater. The birth of your son has changed the political weather in the palace. The immediate anxiety about the succession has eased, but a new, more complex web of intrigue is being spun. And at the center of this web sits a figure who has just become infinitely more powerful, your wife, the Empress. She is no longer just your political partner, she is now the mother of the heir, the guardian of the future. Her status has been elevated, and with it, her ambition. This is where we explore the dual identity of the Roman Empress. On one hand, she was expected to be the model of traditional Roman womanhood, modest, dignified, loyal to her husband, and dedicated to her children. This was the public image, the one carefully crafted on coins and in official inscriptions. She was the Mater Castrorum, mother of the army camps, or Mater Patria, mother of the fatherland. She was a symbol of stability and domestic virtue. But behind this serene public facade, an empress was, by necessity, a formidable political player. She had to be her own survival, and more importantly, the survival of her son, depended on it. She was now in the business of legacy building, and that was a dangerous business. Let's look at the master of this game. Our primary historical example, Livia Drusilla, the wife of Augustus. For 50 years, she was the most powerful woman in Rome. Publicly, she was the perfect Roman matron. She was said to dress simply and spin her own wool, embodying the old-fashioned virtues her husband was trying to promote. She was his loyal advisor and confidant, but the ancient sources, particularly the historian Tacitus, paint a picture of a much more ruthless operator. Livia had a son from her previous marriage, Tiberius. Augustus had several other potential heirs who were more direct blood relatives, including his grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar. Tacitus presents a chilling sequence of events over the years. Every single one of Augustus's other potential heirs met an untimely end. Gaius and Lucius died young on military campaigns. Another grandson, Agrippa Postumus, was exiled and later executed. With every death, Livia's son Tiberius moved one step closer to the throne. Tacitus doesn't outright accuse Livia of murder, but his insinuation is clear. He portrays her as a classic evil stepmother, a patient and cunning strategist who cleared the path for her son with poison and intrigue. This portrayal has defined her legacy. Was she truly a serial poisoner, or was she just the victim of a smear campaign by senators who resented her influence? This reasoned ongoing debates of Roman history. We simply don't have enough unbiased evidence to know for sure. Your own wife is now in a similar position. She looks at your court not as a collection of colleagues, but as a field of threats. That popular general you admire, he's a potential usurper who might try to displace your son. That ambitious niece from another branch of the family, she might marry a senator and produce a rival claimant. Your wife becomes the chief intelligence officer of the dynasty. She has her own network of ladies-in-waiting, loyal servants, and freedmen who act as her eyes and ears in the palace. She gathers information, identifies threats, and whispers warnings or perhaps poison of a more literal kind in your ear. This brings us to a wonderfully strange and specific aspect of Roman female life working. As mentioned with Livia, the image of a noble woman spinning wool if I assume was the ultimate symbol of domestic virtue. It was meant to show she was hardworking, modest, and not idle. It was a powerful piece of political branding. Even on the funerary monument of a noblewoman, you might find the inscription Damon servaviat. Lanum fecit, she kept the house, she made wool. It was the Roman equivalent of a modern politician being photographed doing manual labor to appear relatable. The empress would have to engage in this public performance of domesticity, sitting with her attendants guarding and spinning, all while managing a complex web of political surveillance. The contrast is extraordinary. Her primary goal is to ensure that her son, and only her son, succeeds you. If you have sons from a previous marriage, she will see them as direct threats to her own child. If you show favor to a nephew or an adopted son, she will work tirelessly to undermine them. The imperial family becomes a battlefield of competing maternal ambitions. Consider the case of Agrippina the Younger, the mother of Nero. She was a great-granddaughter of Augustus, a woman with imperial blood in her veins. She managed to marry her uncle, the Emperor Claudius, and persuade him to adopt her son Nero, even though Claudius had his own natural son, Britannicus. Agrippina then systematically isolated and undermined Britannicus. When Claudius died poisoned, Tacitus suggests, by Agrippina with a dish of mushrooms Nero became emperor, but her victory was short-lived. Once Nero was in power, he came to resent his mother's controlling influence. The political operator who had created the emperor was now seen by that emperor as an obstacle. Their relationship soured, and Nero eventually had her assassinated in a gruesome and protracted series of attempts. Agrippina's story is a stark warning. The skills needed to put your son on the throne are the very skills that can make you a threat to him once he's there. As you watch your wife cooing over your son in the nursery, you see both the loving mother and the political strategist. She is his fiercest protector, a lioness guarding her cub. Her love is real, but her methods must be ruthless. You are partners in this, but you are also potential rivals, each with your own ideas about how to secure the future. The Empress is not a passive queen. She is the CEO of the dynasty, and she will do whatever it takes to ensure a successful transition of power. The presence of a young heir in the palace has supposedly brought stability, but you're discovering that it has actually sown a new and more insidious kind of paranoia. The fear of a succession crisis has been replaced by the fear of a tainted succession. And this fear emanates directly from your bedchamber. It's the deep, gnawing anxiety about adultery. For most Roman men, a wife's infidelity was a matter of personal and family honor. For you, the emperor, it's a matter of national security. The legitimacy of your heir, and therefore the stability of the entire Roman world, rests on a single, unprovable assumption that he is truly your son. Any doubt cast upon his paternity is an open invitation to chaos. It's a weapon that your enemies can use to delegitimize your entire dynasty. This fear transforms your relationship with your wife in the very space of your private apartments. Trust, which was already a rare commodity, evaporates completely. Every man your wife speaks to, every friendly conversation she has with a handsome courtier, every private meeting with a senator, becomes a source of suspicion. Is she merely conducting the normal social business of an empress? Or is she engaged in a conspiracy? Is she loyal? Or is she a traitor to your bloodline? The Julian laws on adultery, which your predecessor Augustus put in place, now seem to have a terrifying personal relevance. Under these laws, a man who discovered his wife was cheating was legally obligated to divorce her and prosecute her. If he failed to do so, he could be charged with profiting from her infidelity. Now, imagine your predicament. If you accuse your wife, the mother of the heir, of adultery, you are essentially announcing to the world that your son may be a bastard. You would be destroying your own legacy in the process of upholding the law. But if you harbor suspicions and do nothing, You live in a state of constant, corrosive doubt. Let's consider the historical case of Julia the Elder, the only daughter of Augustus. This is our central example. Augustus had groomed her to be the mother of future emperors. He married her off 3 times to his chosen successors. She was the vessel of his dynastic hopes. But Julia had a mind and desires of her own. She was intelligent, witty, and popular, but she chafed under her father's strict moral legislation. She began to lead a scandalous double life, engaging in multiple affairs and late-night revelries in the Roman Forum, openly mocking her father's puritanical laws. When Augustus finally learned the extent of her activities, he was faced with an impossible choice. His own daughter was the most high-profile violator of his signature moral law. To ignore it would make him a laughingstock. To enforce it would mean publicly shaming his own family and casting doubt on the legitimacy of his own grandsons, the heirs to the throne. He chose a middle path. He didn't execute her, but he didn't forgive her either. He denounced her in a letter to the Senate and exiled her to the tiny, desolate island of Pandateria, where she was forbidden from drinking wine or receiving male visitors. He broke his own heart and his own dynastic plan to uphold the principle of his law. The story is a devastating illustration of how personal scandal and state politics were inextricably linked. This constant fear of adultery led to an almost obsessive surveillance of the Empress. Her every movement would be tracked. Her inner circle of ladies-in-waiting would be carefully vetted for loyalty. Eunuchs, seen as safe guardians, would be employed to watch over her apartments. The imperial bedchamber, a supposed place of intimacy, becomes a prison, not just for her, but for you too, a prison of suspicion. And here is a wonderfully strange and specific detail that highlights the Romans' anxieties about legitimacy, the belief in Caligula and why. This was a discredited scientific theory, popular in the ancient world and beyond, which held that a female's offspring could be influenced by a male she had previously mated with. So, even if your wife was faithful to you now, there could be a lingering fear that her child might somehow resemble a previous husband or lover. It's biological nonsense, of course, but this belief would have added another layer of paranoia to the already fraught business of producing a pure heir. This paranoia is a rich field for historical debate. When we read accounts of empresses being accused of adultery and treason, how much of it was real and how much was political maneuvering and accusation of adultery was the perfect weapon to remove a powerful or inconvenient empress. If a faction at court wanted to get rid of your wife and her influence, they could fabricate a story of infidelity. They could bribe servants to give false testimony. It would be almost impossible to root out, is the evidence real, or is it a carefully constructed plot? Agrippina the Elder, the mother of Caligula, was a victim of this. She was a proud and popular woman, the revered widow of the hero Germanicus. The Emperor Tiberius and his powerful Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, saw her and her sons as a threat. They couldn't attack her directly, so they began a campaign of whispers and rumors, accusing her of ambition and sexual immorality. Eventually, Tiberius had her arrested and exiled to Pandateria, the same island as Julia, where she was treated harshly and eventually died of malnutrition, possibly a forced suicide. The charge of sexual misconduct was the key that unlocked her political destruction. You find yourself looking at your wife, the woman you share a bed with, and seeing not a partner, but a potential liability. You examine your son's face, searching for resemblances, for proof. The fear of betrayal turns you into a domestic tyrant, a spy in your own home. The pressure to secure the dynasty has created a poison that corrupts the very heart of its trust. And in the silent, tense rooms of the palace, you realize that a civil war sparked by a disputed succession is a loud and bloody affair, but the war of suspicion in your own family is a quiet, daily, and unending torment. Your fear of a wife's betrayal is not an abstract anxiety. It's a fear with a face, a name that all of Rome whispers Messalina. The story of what can happen when an empress's behavior spins completely out of control is a lesson every emperor after Claudius had to learn. Her tale is the ultimate cautionary narrative about the intersection of female agency, imperial power, and political suicide. Valeria Messalina was the third wife of your predecessor, the Emperor Claudius. When Claudius, a man long considered a bumbling academic and fit for power, was unexpectedly made emperor, Messalina was suddenly thrust into the position of the most powerful woman in the world. She was young, beautiful, and, according to the ancient historians, possessed an insatiable sexual appetite that she combined with a ruthless political ambition. For several years, she was the true power behind the throne. Claudius was older, easily manipulated, and deeply reliant on his wife and his powerful freedmen secretaries. Messalina used this influence to her advantage. She allegedly sold political offices, then citizenships to the highest bidder. She engineered the exile or execution of anyone she saw as a rival, both male and female. She coveted the luxurious gardens of a certain senator, so she accused him of conspiracy and had him eliminated. Her corruption was, by all accounts, audacious and transparent, but it's her private life, or rather, her spectacularly public private life, that cemented her infamous legacy. This is the main historical narrative of her fall. The Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius paint a picture of a woman who was not just unfaithful, but compulsively and flagrantly so. They claimed she would disguise herself with a wig and sneak out of the palace at night to work as a common prostitute in a city brothel, simply for the thrill of it. The most famous story, recounted by the poet Juvenal and the elder Pliny, is of a competition she supposedly held with a well-known professional prostitute named Scylla. The goal was to see who could take on more clients in a single 24-hour period. Messalina, the Empress of Rome, allegedly won the contest, exhausting herself but remaining unconquered. This story is our quirky, if shocking, detail. It's almost certainly an exaggeration, a piece of hostile propaganda designed to make her seem as depraved as possible. But the fact that it was told and believed shows the reputation she had acquired. She wasn't just breaking the rules, she was tamazing them. She was taking the secret, whispered fears of every powerful Roman husband and acting them out on a world stage. This went on for years. Why did Claudius, the emperor, not stop her? The historians debate this. Was he truly oblivious, a fool so blinded by love or so detached from reality that he didn't know what was happening in his own palace? Or was he aware but too terrified of her and her powerful allies to act? Or, a third possibility, were her crimes wildly exaggerated by her enemies, and Claudius simply didn't believe the more outlandish stories? It's a fascinating question of psychology and power. The end came when Messalina took her audacity one step too far. While Claudius was away from Rome, visiting the port of Ostia, Messalina decided to marry her lover, a handsome young senator named Gaius Silius. This was not a secret affair, it was a full, public wedding ceremony, complete with a signed contract and witnesses. This act remains baffling to historians, and it's the center of the academic debate surrounding her. What was she thinking? Was it a genuine attempt at a coup d'etat? Did she believe she could divorce Claudius, marry Silius, and install him as a new, more pliable emperor, with herself as the true ruler? Or was it an act of sheer, insane recklessness? The ultimate thrill for a woman who had already done everything else. Was she so convinced of her own power and Claudius's weakness that she believed she could get away with bigamy? This time she had miscalculated. The news was brought to Claudius at Ostia by one of his trusted freedmen, Narcissus, who had long been a rival of Messalina. Narcissus knew this was his moment to destroy her. He presented the marriage not as an act of infidelity, but as an act of treason and attempt to overthrow the state. This finally broke through Claudius's inaction. Terrified and confused, he gave Narcissus the authority to handle the situation. The crackdown was swift and brutal. Silius and the other key members of the wedding party were arrested and executed immediately. Messalina fled to the gardens of Lucullus, the very park she had coveted and acquired through murder. She was in a state of panic, her power having evaporated in an instant. Claudius wavered. When he heard that Messalina was begging for a chance to plead her case, his anger began to soften. Narcissus, fearing that the emperor would forgive her, he had to act fast. He didn't wait for a direct order. He went to the tribune of the guard on duty and simply said, "The emperor commands you to execute the empress." The tribune and his soldiers went to the gardens, where they found Messalina on the floor, with her own mother beside her, who had stood by her through her years of triumph, was now urging her to take her own life with dignity. But Messalina, in the end, lacked the courage. As she hesitated, weeping, the tribune drew his sword and ran her through. The story of Messalina is the ultimate cautionary tale. It shows the danger of an empress who wields immense informal power without the formal authority to back it up. Her power was entirely dependent on her husband's favor, and when that was gone, she had nothing. For you, the emperor, her story is a stark reminder. The whispers about your wife's behavior are not just gossip. They are political dynamite. If you let them go unchecked, they can lead to a crisis that threatens to blow up your entire reign. You must control your house, or your house will destroy you. The fall of Messalina, or the quiet fear of a similar scandal in your own court, has left a lingering poison in the palace air. The grand political threats, rebellions, invasions are things you can understand and confront. But now you're aware of a different kind of threat, one that is silent, intimate, and operates in the shadows of your own home. It's the threat of the poison bottle, the doctored drink, the meal that tastes just a little bit off. In the high-stakes game of imperial succession and intrigue, assassination by poison is the weapon of choice. Your bedroom and your dining hall, the places of rest and sustenance, are now potential crime scenes. And the most ambiguous and powerful figures in this new, paranoid landscape are the very people meant to keep you healthy: your physicians, your food tasters, and your pharmacists. They are your lifelines and your most terrifying potential assassins. The fear of being poisoned was an endemic part of life for a Roman emperor. This is our central historical fact. It wasn't just the stuff of sensationalist history, it was a practical daily concern. As a result, you would have a whole team of servants dedicated to mitigating this risk. The most important of these was the praegustat, or the official food taster. This was likely a slave of trusted loyalty, whose job was to take the first bite of every dish and the first sip of every drink served to you. It was a grim job with a simple pass-fail metric if the taster collapsed. You didn't eat the food. The Emperor Claudius, despite being surrounded by intrigue, was said to have relied heavily on his taster, a eunuch named Halotus. Ironically, after the execution of Messalina, Claudius married his niece, Agrippina the Younger. And when Claudius himself died, the rumor, as famously reported by Tacitus, was that Agrippina had finally done him in with a poisoned dish of his favorite mushrooms. The great irony, according to the historian, is that the poison was either administered by Halotus the taster himself, or he somehow failed to detect it. The very system designed to protect the emperor became, in the end, the instrument of his demise. This brings us to the fascinating and murky world of Roman medicine and toxicology. Roman physicians had a sophisticated knowledge of herbal remedies and pharmacology. They understood the properties of many plants, both helpful and harmful, but their science was deeply intertwined with magic and superstition. The recipe for a medicine might include precise measurements of herbs, but also instructions to gather them under a full moon while reciting an incantation. This makes our quirky detail for the night the science of antidotes. Given the constant fear of poison, there was a huge market for universal antidotes. The most famous of these was called Mithridateum, named after Mithridates VI, a king of Pontus who was so paranoid about being poisoned that he supposedly spent years microdosing himself with various toxins to build up an immunity. He also developed a complex secret formula for an antidote containing dozens of ingredients, including things like opium, ginger, and according to some recipes, pieces of viper. After Rome conquered Pontus, the recipe for this legendary antidote was brought back as a spoil of war. Roman emperors became obsessed with it, taking a small dose every day as a precaution. The effectiveness of this concoction is, of course, highly debatable, but the psychological comfort it provided was immense. The physicians in your court occupy a space of incredible power and terrifying ambiguity. Your personal doctor is one of the few people allowed intimate, physical contact with you. He is one of the few people you must trust implicitly. He has the power to heal you, but he also has the knowledge to kill you in a way that looks like natural causes. A slightly larger dose of a sleeping draft, a medicine that interacts poorly with another, a slow-acting poison that mimics the symptoms of a common illness. The possibilities are endless. When an emperor fell ill, his physician became the most important man in the empire. If the emperor died, was it because the doctor was incompetent or because he was a brilliant, unsuccessful assassin, paid off by a rival? This is a question that haunts the deathbeds of several emperors, and it's a source of constant academic debate. For instance, when Augustus was it simply old age, as Suetonius suggests, or was it, as Cassius Dio hints, because his wife Olivia was secretly smearing poison on the figs he liked to pick from the garden, to finally clear the way for her son Tiberius, proving a death was due to poison, centuries after the fact, is nearly impossible. All we have are the suspicious whispers and the political motivations. The person who prepares your medicine, the pharmacopoeia, is just as suspect. They work with herbs, minerals, and animal parts, grinding them into powders and mixing them into potions. Their workshop would look to modern eyes like a cross between a pharmacy and an alchemist's lab. A simple mistake could be fatal. A deliberate substitution could be treason. You find yourself watching everyone. You watch the taster's face for any flicker of hesitation. You study the physician's eyes as he measures out your daily dose of mithridate. You become an expert in your own paranoia. You might even take your own precautions, only eating fruits you pick yourself, or drinking from a sealed container of wine that no one else has touched. But the fear is corrosive. It isolates you further, turning the simple, necessary acts of eating and drinking into rituals of suspicion. In this world of whispered accusations and invisible threats, you realize that the most dangerous weapon is not a sword. A sword is honest. It's loud, messy, and its wielder is obvious. A drop of poison is silent, subtle, and anonymous. It can be delivered with a smile and a hand on the shoulder. And the deepest horror of it is that it turns the very things that should sustain life, food, drink, and medicine, into its potential end. You survive the open political battles, the subtle humiliations, the treacherous succession games, and the constant, gnawing fear of poison. You've become a master of paranoia, trusting no one, seeing threats in every shadow. But the final, fatal threat often doesn't come from the places you're watching. The conspiracy that finally brings you down is almost always born in the one place you are supposed to feel safe, your own bedroom, among the people who know you best. The history of your predecessors is a repeating pattern. The seeds of the coup are sown in the imperial household itself. The plot isn't hatched in the Senate house or in a distant legionary camp. It's whispered in the corridors outside your chambers, planned by the very people you see every day, your guards, your servants, your wife, or your most trusted advisors. They know your habits. They know your habits. They know when you are alone and vulnerable. Our central historical case study for this is the assassination of the Emperor Domitian. Domitian was the younger son of Vespasian, and he ruled for 15 years. He was an efficient but autocratic ruler, and his relationship with the Senate was notoriously bad. He insisted on being addressed as Dominus et Deus, Master and God, which did not go over well with the proud aristocracy. As his reign wore on, his paranoia deepened, leading to a series of treason, trials, and executions. He created an atmosphere of terror at court, and eventually, that terror boomeranged. The conspiracy against him was an inside job through and through. According to Suetonius, The plot involved members of his own staff, including his chamberlain Parthenius, and even, allegedly, his own wife, Dumidi A. Longinae. They were all people who lived in daily fear of the emperor's increasingly erratic and deadly whims. They weren't just motivated by political ambition, they were motivated by self-preservation. The final act was brutally intimate. The conspirators used one of their own, a steward named Stephanius, to be the triggerman. Stephanius had faked an arm injury, wearing a wool bandage on his left arm for several days to allay suspicion. But hidden inside the bandage was a dagger. He gained an audience with Domitian by claiming to have information that him, the emperor, read the fake report that Stephanius handed him. Stephanius drew the dagger and stabbed him in the groin. Domitian, a strong man, fought back. He cried out for his personal slave boy to hand him the sword he kept under his pillow. But the boy found that the blade had already been removed, another sign of the conspiracy's depth. As the emperor and Stephanius wrestled on the floor, the other conspirators, including palace servants and even a few gladiators, rushed in and stabbed him to death. He was murdered in his own bedroom, by his own staff, betrayed by the very people whose job it was to protect him. This brings us to a specific and rather chilling detail about imperial security, the Praetorian Guard. These were the elite soldiers stationed in Rome, whose primary job was to be the emperor's personal bodyguard. They were the kingmakers and the kingbreakers of the early empire. Their loyalty was essential, and it was constantly being purchased with bonuses and favors. But their proximity to the emperor made them the most dangerous potential assassins. The murder of Caligula was carried out by his own Praetorian officers. They were the ultimate double-edged sword. You couldn't live without them, but you might very well die because of them. The academic debate here revolves around the nature of these conspiracies. Were they typically broad-based movements involving dozens of senators and officials, as some sources suggest, or were they more often small, desperate plots hatched by a handful of people in the emperor's inner circle who felt their own lives were in immediate danger? The answer likely varies from case to case. Some plots, like the Pisonian conspiracy against Nero, were indeed large and involved many prominent figures, but the ones that succeeded, like the assassinations of Caligula or Domitian, seem to have been swift, brutal, workplace violence incidents carried out by people with intimate access who had finally been pushed too far. The story of Domitian contains another fascinating detail. Suetonius reports that Domitian was deeply superstitious and terrified by prophecies of his own death. Astrologers had told him the exact day and hour he would die. As the day approached, his anxiety became unbearable. On his final morning, he asked what time it was. A servant, who was in on the plot, deliberately told him it was the 6th hour, an hour later than it actually was. Relieved to think the foretold time of danger had passed, relaxed and went to his study. It was there that Stephanius was waiting for him. He was killed at the 5th hour, just as the prophecy had foretold. His death was orchestrated by the people who knew his deepest fears and used them against him. As you lie in your own bed, the silence of the palace at night is no longer comforting. It's menacing. The guard standing outside your door, is he a protector or a future killer? The servant who brings you your nightly wine, is he loyal or waiting for the signal? You've built walls of stone around you, but you realize the real danger was inside with you all along. You have absolute power over the entire world, but in the end, you have no power over the fear and hatred you've inspired in the handful of people who stand closest to you. Your fortress has become your tomb, and the most dangerous place in the empire is the space between you and the person next to you. After dwelling for so long in the dark, paranoid world of betrayal and excess, it feels like emerging into the sunlight to consider a different path. Not all of your predecessors were Caligula and Nero's. History remembers one specific era, the 2nd century AD, as a time of relative peace and stability. presided over by a succession of rulers so famously competent. They were later dubbed the Five Good Emperors by none other than Machiavelli and Marcus Aurelius. And the key to their success wasn't just wise public policy. It was how they managed their private lives to project an image of moderation and control. They were a conscious and deliberate contrast to the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties that came before them. They understood that the emperor's bedroom was not a private space. They knew that tales of scandalous parties and sexual excess undermined their authority and made them look like tyrants. So, they cultivated an image of stoic self-restraint, marital fidelity, and simple living. This became their political brand, and it was wildly successful. Our main focus here is on the Emperor Trajan. He was a career soldier from Spain, the first non-Italian to become emperor. He was immensely popular with both the army and the Senate. He was known for his ambitious public works like Trajan's Market and the New Form and his successful military campaigns, which expanded the empire to its greatest extent. But his personal life was a crucial part of his political success. Unlike the emperors who flaunted their power through cruelty and indulgence, Trajan projected an image of being the primus inter pares, the first among equals. He would walk among the people in the forum without a massive retinue of guards. He treated senators with respect, and his personal life reflected this. While he enjoyed his wine and was known to appreciate the company of young men, as was common for his time, there were no stories of wild, debauched parties or of him humiliating the wives and sons of the nobility. His relationships were, by all accounts, discreet and kept out of the public eye. His relationship with his wife, Palatine, was a model of imperial partnership. She was intelligent, respected, and like her husband, projected an image of quiet dignity and traditional virtue. Here's a wonderful, specific detail that captures her character perfectly. When she first entered the imperial palace after Trajan became emperor, she reportedly turned to the crowd and said, "I enter here such a woman as I would wish to be when I leave." It was a public declaration of her intention to remain modest and unchanged by power. She was making a promise to the Roman people, and by all accounts, she kept it. This was brilliant political theater, establishing her and Trajan's reign as one based on virtue, not on wit. The Five Good Emperors also solved the succession problem, for a time, with the system of adoption we mentioned earlier. Instead of leaving the fate of the empire to the genetic lottery of a natural-born son, they chose their successors based on merit. This practice was the cornerstone of the era's stability. It removed the intense, paranoid pressure from the imperial bedroom. The emperor didn't need to produce an heir from his own body. He needed to identify the most capable man in the empire and groom him for power. This turned the succession from a family drama into a rational political process. Of course, this idyllic picture is open to some academic debate. Was this era truly a golden age for everyone, or just for the wealthy senatorial class who wrote the history's life for the common farmer, where the slave in the mines probably didn't change much whether the emperor was good or bad? And were these emperors really as virtuous as our sources, like Cassius Dio and the Historia Augustae, make them out to be? Some historians argue that their public image was just a more effective form of propaganda. They were still absolute autocrats, they were just better at marketing. For example, Hadrian, Trajan's successor, was a brilliant administrator and a lover of the arts. But he could also be ruthless. He had several rival senators executed at the beginning of his reign. His intense and public grief over the death of his lover Antinous, while perhaps romantic to modern eyes, was seen by some conservative Romans as excessive and un-Roman. The goodness of these emperors was often a matter of perspective. Even Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the epitome of Stoic virtue, is not without his critics. He spent much of his reign fighting brutal wars on the German frontier, and his rule saw the first widespread, state-sanctioned persecution of Christians. And, most famously, his one great failure was in succession. He was the first of the five to have a suitable natural-born son, Commodus, and he broke with the tradition of adoption, passing the empire to him, a megalomaniac who thought he was the reincarnation of Hercules, and his reign plunged the empire back into the chaos and instability that the good emperors had worked so hard to avoid. So, as you reflect on this period, you see a different model of power. The reigns of the 5 good emperors teach a crucial lesson: the emperor's private life is a public statement. By projecting an image of moderation, fidelity, and rational thought, they calmed the anxieties of the Roman elite. They understood that true power wasn't just the ability to do whatever you wanted, it was the wisdom and self-control to choose not to. They replaced the politics of fear with the politics of respect. But their story also comes with a warning. Embodied by Commodus, the system built on the wisdom of individuals is only ever one generation away from falling back into the hands of a fool. Let's fast forward a few centuries. Your reign, whether it was one of virtuous moderation or scandalous excess, is long over. The marble halls of your palace are crumbling. The Roman Empire, in the new power, a new morality, is spreading across Europe. Christianity. And in this new world, the stories of your private life and the lives of your predecessors are about to be given a second life. They are about to become the most effective negative propaganda imaginable. The early Christian writers and historians, men like Tertullian, Eusebius, and a monumental task. They needed to explain to a world that had been dominated by Rome for centuries why that great empire had declined and why their new faith was the superior path. They were engaged in a battle for the soul of the old Roman world, and in this battle, the scandalous stories of the pagan emperors were their most powerful weapon. This is the core concept of this chapter: the posthumous transformation of imperial scandal into religious polemic. The lurid tales recorded by Suetonius and Tacitus were not just entertaining gossip anymore, they were evidence. They were exhibitae in the Christian argument against the moral bankruptcy of the old pagan world. Think about it from their perspective. They wanted to show that the pagan gods were false and that the society that worshipped them was inherently corrupt. What better way to do this than to point at the very head of that society, the emperor, who was often worshipped as a god himself, Divius, if the divine Augustus was an adulterer, if the divine Tiberius was a pervert, if Caligula was an incestuous madman, and if Nero was a matricid monster who married a castrated boy. Then what did that say about the entire religious and moral system they represented? The Christian authors took the old stories and amplified them, stripping them of any nuance or political context. Caligula wasn't a complex figure in a power struggle with the Senate. He was a simple monster, a demonstration of what happens when a man without God has absolute power. Nero wasn't just a bad emperor, he was the antichrist, the ultimate enemy of God. His persecution of Christians after the Great Fire of Rome in 60 for AD cemented his status as the arch-villain of the faith. This leads us to a fascinating unspecific detail: the invention of the orgy. The modern conception of a Roman orgy, a massive, decadent party involving indiscriminate group sex, is largely a product of this later Christian interpretation, further sensationalized by 19th century painters and 20th century filmmakers. While the Roman elite certainly held wild, drunken dinner parties, calm as sati ones that could involve sexual entertainment, the chaotic, free-for-all scene we imagine is probably an exaggeration. The Christian writers took the Roman elite's love for luxury and banqueting and deliberately conflated it with sexual depravity to create a powerful image of a society lost in sin. The word orge in Latin and Greek originally referred to secret religious rites, like the rites of Bacchus. The Christian writers cleverly repurposed the term, associating it forever with debauchery. The emperors we've discussed as being good, like Trajan or Marcus Aurelius, presented a problem for this narrative. So the Christian writers found ways to deal with them. Trajan was so respected for his justice that a later medieval legend developed that Pope Gregory the Great was so moved by his goodness that he prayed for Trajan's soul to be rescued from hell and brought to heaven. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher, was harder to condemn on personal grounds, so Christian writers focused on his persecution of their co-religionists, portraying him as a wise man tragically blinded to the truth of the gospel. The academic debate here is a lively one, focusing on how we can possibly separate the original historical facts from the layers of later propaganda. How much of what we know about the bad emperors is just a reflection of Suetonius's love for gossip, and how much is a reflection of Orosius's need for a moral bogeyman? Historians now have to engage in a kind of textual archaeology, carefully scraping away the layers of Christian moralizing and political smearing to try to get back to the original event, the task that is often impossible. They must constantly ask, who is telling this story, and why are they telling it now? The legacy of these stories is immense. They didn't just help Christianity triumph over paganism. They shaped the entire Western conception of power and tyranny for the next 1500 years. When writers in the Renaissance or the Enlightenment wanted to warn against the dangers of absolute monarchy, they didn't have to invent a fictional tyrant. They just had to say the name Caligula or Nero. These long-dead emperors became timeless archetypes of how power corrupts. So as you look back from the afterlife, you see your most intimate moments, your most private shames, your most decadent parties, all being repackaged and repurposed. They are no longer your secrets. They are now parables, cautionary tales told to frighten school children and justify a new world order. You, the most powerful man of your time, have become a footnote in someone else's story, a villain in a play you never auditioned for. Your personal life wasn't just political in your own time, it became a theological battleground for centuries after your death. And in that battle, the version of you that was most useful to the winners was the one that survived. And so here we are, at the end of the long, winding road of your imperial life. We've walked through the gilded halls of the Palatine, navigated the treacherous waters of the court, and peered into the darkest corners of the human heart when it's been given absolute power. We've seen how the grand narrative of an empire, its wars, its laws, its rise and fall, is so often written in the intimate, secret ink of a single person's private choices. This is the final, overarching truth of your story. For a Roman emperor, the bedroom and the empire were not separate realms. They were one and the same. This fundamental link between the private man and the public state is the most important historical lesson of your reign. Unlike a modern leader who can, in theory, maintain a private life, your life had no such firewall. Your body was not your own, it was the property of the state. Your health determined the stability of the markets. Your moods could shift foreign policy. And your relationships were the building blocks of political power. Think of the direct lines we've drawn. Your choice of a wife was a political merger. The birth of your son was a national holiday and a piece of propaganda stamped onto millions of coins. A rumor of your wife's infidelity wasn't just gossip, it was a potential spark for a civil war. A challenge to the legitimacy of your entire bloodline. Your decision to indulge in a new pleasure, to take a new lover, or to host a scandalous party wasn't just a personal failing, it was a public statement about your character, your fitness to rule, and the very nature of your power. The authority of an emperor, his auctorate as was a fragile thing, built as much on perception as on military might. And that perception was forged in the private chambers of the palace. This brings us to one last, curious detail that perfectly merges the personal and the political, the emperor's last will and testament. For any normal citizen, a will is a private document dividing property among family members. For you, it was one of your final and most powerful political acts. When you died, the reading of your will was a moment of supreme political theater. It could officially name your successor, solidifying a peaceful transfer of power. It could posthumously reward your allies with vast fortunes and praise. It could also be used to settle old scores, leaving insulting gifts to senators you despised. Augustus, the master architect of the system, left behind a will that was a masterpiece of political communication, including not just bequests, but also a summary of his life's achievements, the raised gesture to be inscribed on bronze pillars for all to see. Your most private final wishes were, in fact, your first chapter in the history books. And this leads us to the grand, unanswerable question that historians will debate for as long as your story is told. Did the personal choices and moral failings of emperors like you actually cause the great historical shifts of the empire, or were they merely symptoms of a deeper, systemic problem? Was the Roman Empire weakened because Nero was an narcissist and Commodus was a megalomaniac, or did the very structure of absolute, unaccountable power created by the brilliant Augustus make the eventual emergence of Nero's and Commod? Assess inevitable. Was the rot in the person, or in the system? Was it the character of the emperors that defined the empire's fate, or was it the fate of the empire that produced such characters? There is no easy answer. The truth likely lies in the messy middle, in the feedback loop between the individual and the institution. The system created the pressures, the temptations, the paranoia. But it was your personal, human responses to those pressures that steered the ship of state. As you look back now, a silent observer of your own legacy, you see it clearly. The fate of millions, the borders of the known world, the course of Western civilization itself, were all connected by invisible threads to the quietest, most intimate moments of your life. To a whispered word in the bedchamber, a choice made at the dinner table, a secret fear you confessed to the wrong person. The grand, sweeping story of the Roman Empire is not just a story of legions and laws. It's a story of human hearts, beating with fear and love and ambition, in the quiet, lonely rooms of the palace. And so, the story comes to a close. The echoes of the crowded forum, the clatter of chariot wheels on stone, the whispers in the palace corridors, they all begin to fade, growing softer and more distant. The weight of the purple toggle lifts from your shoulders. The burden of an empire is no longer yours to carry. The faces of allies and enemies, of wives and heirs, all blur and dissolve like figures in a dream. The brilliant mosaics on the floor lose their color, and the marble walls become translucent, melting away into the quiet darkness. You can let it all go now. The paranoia, the plotting, the endless, watchful nights. That's all for the history books, for the ghosts. It's no longer your concern. The journey is over. All that's left is the gentle, quiet dark. The air is still and calm. You can feel yourself drifting now, floating away from the 7 hills of Rome, away from the past. There is only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing, the faint, reassuring hum of the world around you. Right here, right now. The story has ended. And a peaceful, quiet sleep is waiting to begin. Rest now,